We need to talk about the One Piece and why everyone's wrong. Anime Autopsy here, and I need you to be very honest with me for a second, because we as a community have developed a brainworm about the One Piece that I cannot ignore anymore. Every week I still see people say, with full chest, the One Piece is just treasure, it's just a big joke, that's the point. And listen to me, at this stage of the story that is not just wrong, that is derailing how you read the entire endgame. You know the post I'm talking about. Someone crops that panel of Roger and his crew on Laugh Tale, everyone crying, laughing, slapping the ground, and the caption is peak writing, the real treasure was the journey. Maybe they throw in a meme about it being a gag gif from Joy Boy, and then, somehow, those same people never put that image next to late Wano or Egghead panels where Vegapunk is talking about an ancient power that can literally erase the world in an instant. Those two conversations almost never share a screenshot when they should be welded together. Here's the thing. When you insist it's just treasure, you're not being cute and contrarian. You are flattening what Oda has been intentionally building for 25 years. You're taking a story that has spent hundreds of chapters on void century genocide, on ancient weapons that can sink islands, on an ancient kingdom whose crime was having too much freedom, and shoving it back into the safest category possible. Cartoon pirate chest full of gold and punchlines. This is not a sin in the moral sense. This is fine as a coping mechanism, but as actual story analysis, it's denial. And I say that with love. I say that as someone who has spent an absolutely embarrassing amount of adult life rereading every void century chapter, every ancient weapon info dump, every single time an old man whispers, "The day the world will be turned upside down," while my friends are out touching grass. Not because I am smarter than you, because my brain is broken in a very specific, pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast way, and Oda keeps feeding it. When you line those panels up, the difference is brutal. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, learns the true history, sees whatever Joy Boy left, and instead of using it, he laughs, names it the One Piece, and walks away saying he was too early. Meanwhile, the narrative around that mystery is drowning in foreshadowing about world destruction, sea level upheaval, and a coming war that will engulf the world. Do you really think that entire scaffold exists just to hide a punchline about friendship and a cool gold pile? So this video is going to do something very simple and very rude. We need to stop treating the One Piece as a prop and start treating it as the final piece of a world-scale system. The Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, and the ancient weapons all wired together. And then ask the question nobody wants to stare at for too long. What if the One Piece is not treasure at all, but a weapon so massive that Roger literally could not use it, even if he wanted to? Too early for what? Turning Roger's laugh into a horror story. So if the One Piece is the final component of a system, we need to talk about the guy who actually saw the whole blueprint. Gold D. Roger goes to Laugh Tale, reads the true history, sees Joy Boy's punchline, and what does he say? Not, "We're too weak," not, "This is boring." He says very specifically, "We were too early." Too early for what? Listen to me. This is the line the community loves to quote and then immediately run away from. We slap it on edits, we pair it with swelling music, and we go, "Oh, he was too early to enjoy Joy Boy's big cosmic joke." That's the comfy reading, the vibe reading. Roger shows up to the party before the DJ, shrugs, and decides to start the Great Pirate Era so future generations can laugh properly. This is fine. This is normal. It's also, if you actually take the canon seriously, nonsense. Because the story keeps telling you that Laugh Tale is not a comedy club. O'Hara is erased for researching the Void Century. Clover gets shot mid-sentence for trying to say the Ancient Kingdom's name. Poneglyph readers are hunted down. If the One Piece is just treasure and a prank, why does the world government treat history itself as a weapon of mass destruction? Why is information the thing they're most afraid of? Here's the thing. Too early only makes moral sense if there was an action Roger could have taken. A switch he could have flipped. a system he could have completed that would have overturned the entire world order overnight. If all he discovered was a chest of gold and a funny diary, then starting the Great Pirate Era is just him going, "Hey, I'll let some other guy enjoy the joke." That's not interesting. That's procrastination. But if what he found was the last step in Joy Boy's world-scale mechanism, if the Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, and the 3 ancient weapons are all components in a global device that can literally reset the planet, then too early becomes terrifying. Roger isn't just too early to laugh, he's too early to pull the trigger. And notice how that reframes the world government's terror. Pluton in Alabasta and Wano is framed as a ship that can erase islands. Poseidon in Fishman Island is a mermaid who commands sea kings and can move entire nations across the sea. Uranus is still in the shadows, but every hint screams sky-based world-level threat. These aren't random superweapons. They're parts of a planned category of tools, all foreshadowing a single integrated system Joy Boy built and then walked away from. Roger reaches the control room and realizes the machine is incomplete. The conditions aren't met. The person it's intended for hasn't even been born. So he does the only thing he can do. He turns his failure into fuel. He dies, on purpose, to ignite an era where the right person might appear. Which raises the real horror story question I need you to sit with. If Roger was too early to use this thing, what exactly is Luffy supposed to do when he's right on time? Because once we walk through Skypiea, Zoo, Wano and Egghead, you're going to see that answer staring you in the face. Before we argue, what this monster of a video is actually doing. So before we sprint face first into that horror story answer, we need to talk about what this monster of a video is actually doing. You've seen the runtime. You already scrolled and went, "Oh, that's a movie." This is basically a feature-length breakdown. And no, I'm not expecting you to sit here, strapped to your chair, consuming One Piece theory on an IV drip. Pause, eat, touch grass. This is fine. This is normal. But here's the thing. If I tried to cram this argument into 20 minutes, I would have to lie to you by omission. I'd have to cherry-pick panels, ignore counterexamples, and do the exact pattern-seeking monkey routine I'm accusing the community of. Wow, this one page from Skypiea mentions an ancient city. Foreshadowing confirmed. Pack it up. That's not an honest reading. That's seeing Jesus in toast and calling it scholarship. So core thesis, clean and simple, on the table. The One Piece is not treasure. It's not a chest of gold. It's not just the friends we made along the way. And it's not a gag. It is a world-scale weapon or mechanism built by Joy Boy, integrated into the same system as Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, designed to reset or rewrite the balance of the planet. Roger found it. Roger understood it. Roger could not use it because the conditions it needs, the weapons, the will, the era, weren't in place yet. That's the claim. Now method. I need you to understand how we're going to get there so you don't feel lost halfway through Wano wondering when I started talking about battleships. First, we build a conceptual framework. Before we ever yell foreshadowing at a panel, we're going to define categories. What counts as a hint? What counts as an intentional plan by the author? What counts as a weapon in this story? And what a world reset even means in a weekly manga. If we don't do that, any cool line from Rayleigh, any shot of the red line, any Sea King prophecy can be drafted into any theory. At that point, the conversation has no breaks. Then we walk, arc by arc, Loguetown's execution platform and Roger's inherited will. Skypiea's endless earth, the ancient city, and the sky weapon imagery. Water 7 and Eni's lobby with Pluton's blueprints. Fishman Island and Poseidon's command over Sea Kings. Zoo's road poneglyphs. Whole Cake's political map. Wano's buried Pluton and global sea level switch. Egghead's Void Century data dump and Vegapunk spelling out that once you know the full history, you are obligated to act. Throughout, we're going to keep asking, is this planned infrastructure for a single system, or am I just retrofitting? This is not a sin either way, but we need to know which is which. Payoff-wise, by the end you won't just have the One Piece is a weapon stamped on your forehead. You'll have a coherent model for how Oda's been writing this endgame from day one, and a better vocabulary for talking about planning, foreshadowing, and retrofits in this series. And once that scaffolding is up, then we can finally answer the real question. What does it mean when the freest man on the sea inherits the key to erase the world? The three lenses: foreshadowing, retrofitting, and whatever Oda is doing. So to answer that, we need to get our tools straight. I need you to stop waving the word foreshadowing around like it's a universal remote that works on every mystery in this story. It doesn't. We're going to use three lenses, three categories, so every clue about the One Piece and the ancient weapons actually goes in the right box. First, foreshadowing in the classical sense. Foreshadowing is when an author intentionally plants information early because they already know the specific payoff it's pointing to. The key word there is intentional. You put the gun on the table in Act 1 because you have already planned the scene where someone gets shot in Act 3. The detail exists to serve a known destination, not just a vague vibe. Laboon and Brooks' promise? That's foreshadowing. Oda knew there was a skeleton musician on that ship when he drew a sad whale in East Blue. Second lens, retrofitting. Retrofitting is when an author reaches back into their own story and assigns new meaning to something that originally wasn't planned for that purpose. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long serials survive more than 5 years without collapsing under their own continuity. You look at an old random pipe in the corner and go, actually, that can be a weapon now. Suddenly, a throwaway gag about Kinemon and dragons becomes a trauma marker for Wano. If it feels organic, the community cheers. If it doesn't, we get rage threads. Now here's the thing. Those two categories are not enough to explain what Oda is doing with the One Piece, the Void Century, and the ancient weapons. Because he isn't just planting single guns or grabbing random pipes. He's building the entire room. So third lens, pre-writing. Pre-writing is when an author decides the ending, the core mysteries, the big reveals before Chapter 1, and then just writes toward them in whatever order serialization allows. The setup isn't a hint at a future decision. The setup is a fragment of a decision that was already made. In our metaphor, foreshadowing is the loaded gun on the table. Retrofitting is realizing the pipe in the corner can crack a skull. Pre-writing is designing an entire room full of objects because you know a fight is going to happen there someday, even if you haven't choreographed every punch. Poneglyphs are pre-writing. The ancient weapons are pre-writing. A man with the ability to destroy the world being born in the sea, decades before we hear the word Uranus. Pre-writing. Oda knows this system matters, even if he leaves the exact function of each piece flexible until he needs it. So as we walk through every hint about the One Piece being a world-scale weapon Roger couldn't use, we're going to tag it. Foreshadowing, retrofit, or pre-writing. Not to ruin the magic, but to replace the Oda planned everything from Chapter 1 myth with something scarier. He planned the room, then spent 25 years filling it. And once you see which clues belong to which category, you start noticing something uncomfortable about Roger's trip to Laughtale. Why perfect 1000 chapter? Planning is a fairy tale. And once you notice that discomfort, you run into a really boring, really important wall, how manga actually gets made, actually. Because here's the thing, the Oda planned every grain of sand 25 years ago myth. It doesn't just ignore craft. It ignores labor. Weekly shonen manga is a meat grinder. You're drawing 15 to 20 pages every single week for years. You're juggling rough drafts, name storyboards, final inks, assistants, backgrounds, corrections. On top of that, you've got editorial meetings, jump questionnaires, popularity polls breathing down your neck. If your arc dips in the rankings for too long, the series you planned for 1000 chapters gets politely walked behind the barn. Now, I need you to imagine doing all of that while also holding a perfectly detailed 1,000-chapter battle plan in your head. Every island, every twist, every panel of every reveal, crystal clear from day one. While you're sick, while you're on 2 hours of sleep, while your editor is telling you the cool villain you built your next 3 arcs around is testing poorly with middle schoolers. This is not how human brains or human bodies work. This is not a sin. This is physics. The psychological toll is insane. Mangaka talk about hospital visits, IV drips in the studio, drawing with bandaged hands. Oda himself barely takes breaks and openly jokes about his health in SBS. You're not some serene chess master sipping tea over a perfect 4D outline. You're a stressed-out goblin shoving pages into a fax machine at 3 a.m., hoping your main character's face is still on model. And then you have the external pressure cooker. Editors come in with notes. This arc is dragging. Speed it up. That side character is testing well. Extend them. The magazine is doing a crossover event. Work that in. A rival series just popped off with a tournament. Maybe you suddenly realize your setting always had a tournament too. Plans bend. Arcs balloon or get chopped in half. Characters who were supposed to die live. Characters who were supposed to matter vanish. Rigid 20-year roadmaps do not survive contact with the reader survey. So what actually happens? Retrofitting. Constantly. An author drops a weird line in chapter 40 with no grand design, then 2 years later realizes it can be reinterpreted as the seed of a new reveal. They grab it, reshape it, and suddenly it was intentional foreshadowing all along. The community goes, "Genius!" and the author goes, "Thank God that worked. This is fine. This is normal." The skill isn't never changing your mind. The skill is making the seams invisible. Which brings us back to Oda. Because listen to me, he is not an outlier because he tattooed every single plot beat on his soul in 1997. He's an outlier because he pre-wrote a flexible skeleton. Void Century, ancient weapons, poneglyphs, Joy Boy, the One Piece as a world-scale mechanism, a system. That skeleton can absorb retrofits without breaking. He can pivot a character, extend an arc, respond to fans, and still slot new information into an old framework that was planned. And once you understand that skeleton, Roger's "we were too early" stops being a poetic shrug and starts sounding a lot more like a technical limitation of a weapon he wasn't built to fire. Real foreshadowing 101. What counts and what doesn't. So if Roger hit a technical ceiling on a world-scale mechanism, we need to get brutally clear on what counts as actual evidence he was staring at a weapon and not a treasure chest. Because listen to me, if everything is foreshadowing, then nothing is. If every skull, every circle, every goofy SBS doodle is Oda hinting at the One Piece, the word foreshadowing stops meaning anything, and we're just pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast panels. Here's the thing. Foreshadowing is not this detail later turned out to be relevant. Foreshadowing is, this detail exists because the author already knew exactly what it would pay off into. The causality runs one direction. The payoff doesn't magically reach back in time and convert a random detail into genius planning. The author knows the gun, knows the shooting, then hangs the gun on the wall on purpose. Simple narrative example so we're on the same page. In Act 1, you show a mysterious sealed door in the hero's hometown. While you're writing that scene, you already know that in Act 3 the hero will open it and unleash a buried weapon that levels the capital. You design the door, you choose the dialogue, you decide who reacts nervously, all because you're steering toward that specific third act event. That's foreshadowing. Now, same door, but when you first wrote it, you just thought, cool vibe, spooky door. And only in Act 3, when you're stuck, you go, oh, that door could hide a weapon. That's retrofitting. Same surface result. Completely different category of storytelling. The problem is, our community loves to blur those categories. A fan finds a panel from Chapter 80, where a background seagull's beak lines up with Imu's silhouette, and suddenly it's 20-year foreshadowing confirmed. No, That's not analysis. That's horoscope reading with extra steps. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal fan behavior. But we need to stop calling every coincidental echo, Oda planned this from day one, or the word plan becomes useless. Most competent authors do use real foreshadowing, but it's local, within an arc, within a volume. They know the climax of this storyline, so they seed imagery and dialogue in the first 3 chapters. Totally intentional, totally fair. Claiming this panel from 1999 was secretly about an Egghead reveal in 2023 needs a much higher bar of proof than these 2 chapters in Water 7 talk to each other. So here's the plan. I need you to treat this like a legal case. As we walk through the One Piece weapon theory, we're going to sort every hint into buckets, likely foreshadowing, probable retrofit, or evidence of pre-writing from Oda's original endgame notes. We're going to ask, could he reasonably have known this payoff when he drew that setup? If the answer's no, it doesn't get to testify. And once we clean that up, then we can finally look at the remaining clues and ask the real question. How many of them actually point specifically to the One Piece being a weapon Roger couldn't fire? Retrofitting, the secret engine behind long-running epics. To answer that question, we need to talk about the dirty little engine that makes long-running epics actually work. And I need you to be honest with yourself for a second about how stories get made over 20-30 years. Retrofitting is when an author looks back at something old and fuzzy in the story and goes, okay, that's important now, and then layers new meaning on top. The panel was always there, the line of dialogue was always there, but the specific payoff wasn't fully locked in. You're not rewriting the past. You're reinterpreting it. That random Sea King prophecy, that throwaway gag about an island, that vague mention of an ancient weapon. Prime retrofit material. And here's the thing. This is not a sin. This is not cheating. In a serialized medium, it's often the only way to keep the writing feeling cohesive while the author's brain, deadlines, and the entire publishing industry are throwing new constraints at them. You can pre-write major beats all you want. 25 years in, you're still going to discover better angles, stronger parallels, and new toys you want to connect. Retrofitting is how you weld those toys onto the existing machine without it exploding. The quality condition is really simple. Good retrofits feel inevitable in hindsight. They click into place with the themes, the character arcs, the visual motifs that were already there. You go back to Skypiea after learning about Haki and go, oh, of course, mantra was Haki. Was that meticulously planned terminology from Chapter 1? Probably not. But it's aligned so well with the existing spiritual combat system that it reads as intentional foreshadowing, not a patch. Where this becomes a problem is in fan perception. We are pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and 4D chess in every panel. The community loves to point at a satisfying connection and scream, "He planned this from day one," because that flatters us. It makes us feel like we've been secretly reading a sacred text instead of watching a very talented human being doing skilled improvisation within a pre-written scaffold. We collapse everything into the foreshadowing category, and we lose the difference between decided in 1997 and decided in 2015, cleverly backfilled. Listen to me. This is fine. This is normal. In fact, once you accept retrofitting as a tool, Oda's craft gets more impressive, not less. Because now you're not just praising him for prediction, you're praising him for precision integration. When he decides that Poseidon is Shirahoshi, or that Pluton is sleeping under Wano, or that Uranus might be tied to some world-scale sky weapon, he's not pulling that out of a hat. He's threading new specifics through an old lattice of void century hints, inherited will speeches, and poneglyph breadcrumbs. And that's where the One Piece weapon theory lives. A lot of the ancient weapon echoes around Laugh-Tale and the final treasure. Those almost certainly started as a mix of pre-writing and later retrofits. The idea that the ancient kingdom had a system of world reset tools, that Joy Boy left behind infrastructure for a future generation, that Roger arrived too early to pull the trigger, Those are big, planned pillars. But the exact way Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, and the One Piece interlock? That's been refined on the fly, arc by arc, as he finds sharper ways to point them all at the same terrifying conclusion. Which means, if we want to argue that the One Piece itself is a weapon Roger couldn't use, we need to separate the clean pre-written beams from the retrofitted decorations. So let's start tracing the weapon clues Oda has been quietly bolting onto that original blueprint. A safer battlefield. How Naruto's Tobi twist shows retrofits in action. Before we aim that weapon theory at Oda, I need you to step onto a safer battlefield. Because if I start by saying, hey, maybe the One Piece fandom is over-crediting foreshadowing, you and your pattern-seeking brain are already loading the cannons. So let's talk Naruto, specifically Tobi. You remember how this went. Tobi shows up as the goofy Akatsuki intern, falls over, gets bonked, does the "I'm such a klutz senpai" routine. Then Mask Man flips a switch, becomes this terrifying mastermind manipulating Pain, Itachi, the entire war. And then Kishimoto drops the bomb. Tobi is Obito, Kakashi's dead childhood friend, the guy whose grave we saw. The fandom immediately does what it always does. It was so obvious. He was telling us from chapter 1. Cue the Reddit threads with collages. The spiral mask, obviously matching Obito's crushed face. Those vague lines about "a long time ago in the leaf" that could refer to literally any war trauma. Close-ups on his eye, framed so you can't actually confirm anything, but your brain goes, sharing and equals Obito, case closed. On their own, before the reveal, these are not smoking guns. They're just standard masked villain staging. Mysterious design, cryptic past references, dramatic eye shots. That's not ironclad foreshadowing. That's vibes. Here's the thing. When you dig into author comments and production history, the neat 500-chapter master plan starts to wobble. Kishimoto has said in interviews that Tobi's identity shifted during planning. At different points, Tobi was going to be Madara for real, then an entirely new character wearing Madara's name, and only later settled into Obito as the final answer. He knew he wanted a masked man tied to Konoha's past. He knew he wanted Kakashi's trauma, Rin's death, the war, all braided into one antagonist. But the specific Tobi equals Obito lock-in was not immaculately carved in stone in chapter 1. So what are we actually looking at? Not pure foreshadowing, not pure improv. It's a hybrid. Pre-writing gave him the slots. There will be a masked man. He will be connected to the leaf. He will embody the tragedy of the ninja system. Retrofitting filled in the name on the form. Actually, that guy is Obito. Those early panels weren't precision-engineered clues to Obito. They were flexible scaffolding that could be justified as Obito later. Our community then turns around and backfills intentional foreshadowing onto every swirl and shadow. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal long-running shonen writing. The Tobi twist still lands for a ton of readers. When the mask cracks and Kakashi freezes, the emotional hit is real. The fact that Kishimoto retrofitted the exact identity doesn't erase the payoff. If anything, it proves that smart retrofitting can manufacture that "it was planned all along" high without literal, omniscient planning. Which means we need to be very careful when we point at a 20-year-old panel in One Piece and scream, "Oda foreshadowed the weapon." Are we seeing a blueprint or a retrofit that happens to fit frighteningly well? Because the next clues we're about to walk through blur that line in a way that should make you nervous. So, what is pre-writing and why does Oda abuse it? So to even talk about those clues without turning into a conspiracy corkboard, I need you to accept a dirty word I'm about to invent on purpose. Pre-writing is not a real academic term. No literature professor is out here grading "you're pre-writing on Moby Dick." I'm using it as a label for a very specific Oda habit. He builds giant, mysterious scaffolding years before he's nailed down every bolt in the machine. Poneglyphs, ancient weapons, the void century. These aren't just foreshadowing breadcrumbs. They're empty parking spots he's reserving for future trucks. Here's the thing. Pre-writing, in this context, is Oda planting large, flexible story modules. You don't necessarily know the exact specs of the weapon. You just know there will be an ancient weapon under Wano. You don't have the entire operating manual for Laughtail. You just commit. There will be a final island with the truth, and it will reframe the entire story. The module is planned, the vibe is intentional, but the internal wiring can be adjusted 10 years later when you've drawn 800 chapters of clowns and giraffe men. That's the difference from pure foreshadowing. Traditional foreshadowing is, I know Sanji is a Vinsmoke prince, so I plant Mr. Prince and weird bounty details. Pre-writing is, I know there's a whole ancient weapon system and a Joy Boy plan, so I drop poneglyphs, 3 weapon names, and a lost century, then decide exactly how Pluton connects to Wano once I'm actually in Wano. Is that messy? Potentially. Does it give him insane freedom? Absolutely. And this is what lets Oda maintain the illusion of a perfectly clockwork, 1,000-chapter epic while constantly adapting to new ideas, themes, and editorial realities. He can pivot from Skypiea is a fun detour to Skypiea secretly contains void century tech parallels and the first big Joy Boy hint, without breaking anything, because the scaffolding was already there. The gun was already on the mantle. He just hadn't decided yet whether it was a pistol, a railgun, or a sun god nuke. Pattern interrupt. Most authors cannot do this without face-planting. When they try, it feels clumsy, obvious, or straight-up retconny. Actually, this random jutsu was always god tier. Sure, man, totally. But Oda is an outlier because of the sheer density and durability of his pre-writing. He floods the world with seemingly inert structures. O'Hara's research, Fishman Island's prophecy, Poseidon, Pluton, Uranus, and then, 15 years later, he can bolt Egghead's ancient robot or Wano's Pluton reveal onto those old beams, and it feels eerily intentional instead of desperate. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, how you keep a weekly serial alive for decades without losing your mind. You overbuild the skeleton, then decide which bones you actually want to flex. Which brings us back to the One Piece's weapon theory. Most of that argument lives exactly in the overlap between pre-writing and retrofitting. Joy Boy's plan, the Ancient Kingdom's technology, the poneglyph network on one side, Egghead's ancient robot, Imu's sky laser, and Wano's buried Pluton on the other. There is some genuine foreshadowing in there, sure. But the real power of the theory is that Oda pre-wrote a gigantic world-scale mechanism slot into the story. And he's been slowly deciding in real time how horrifying that mechanism actually is. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because the next step is asking, what kind of treasure fits that pre-written slot without contradicting anything Roger, Rayleigh, or Whitebeard have already told us? The Ancient Kingdom's shadow. Why a treasure never made sense. So here's where we stop squinting at vibes and actually read what Oda put on the page. Because once you zoom in on the Ancient Kingdom, the whole maybe the One Piece is just a funny gold pile headcanon falls apart in about 3 panels. Canonically, what do we have? A civilization so advanced that even Vegapunk, the smartest man in the world, explicitly says his tech is just a knockoff. A kingdom whose ideas were so dangerous that an alliance of 20 nations didn't just beat them in a war. They built a permanent government on top of the corpse and scrubbed the name off the map. That's not how you treat a pirate's vault. That's how you treat a rival superpower with tools you're terrified someone else might dig up. And the response is insane, erasing an entire century of history, hunting down old men in cardigans on O'Hara because they can read rocks, making it literally illegal to study archaeology if the rocks have the wrong font. Listen to me. You do not commit a global, multi-generational book burning over a static pile of treasure. You do that over a blueprint, over a process, over something that can be rebuilt and reused if the wrong person understands the instructions. This is where the ancient weapons stop being side quests and start looking intentional. Pluton is a warship that can erase islands. Poseidon is a person who can command sea kings and, by extension, shipping, borders, the entire ocean-based economy. Uranus is still mostly in silhouette, but every hint frames it as sky scale, world scale. None of these are, here's a chest, enjoy retirement. They are levers. They are components of a system that can literally reshape the planet. So when fans in the community say, well, maybe the One Piece is just treasure and the real reward is the journey, I need you to hear how thematically incoherent that is. We have 800 chapters of foreshadowing about oppression, erased history, inherited will, and planet-buster weapons. And the punchline is a gag chest of gold and a group laugh. This is not a sin in a different story. In a Dragon Ball gag arc, this is fine. In One Piece, after Ohara, after Fishman Island's prophecy, after Wano's closed borders, it collapses under its own weight. Because here's the thing. The ancient kingdom did not die for a punchline. All the evidence points to them building a world-scale mechanism to overturn the existing order and then hard-locking it behind time, bloodlines, and geography. Joy Boy leaves poneglyphs. He leaves Noah. He leaves weapons scattered across the globe. Why would the final island hold anything other than the last piece of that machine, which sharpens Roger's line from "we were too early" into an actual problem? Too early for what? Not too early to cash out. Too early to fire something. To activate a system that needs certain weapons awakened, certain races freed, certain bloodlines born. And that in turn reframes the One Piece not as a prize, but as the trigger Roger refused to pull. The question then becomes terrifyingly simple. What happens when Luffy reaches a trigger his entire character is morally allergic to using? Inherited will, inherited weapon, reframing the series' core motto. So we hit that question. What happens when the world's freest man reaches a trigger his entire personality is allergic to pulling? To answer that, we need to zoom out from the doomsday button and talk about the phrase Oda has been beating into your skull for 25 years. Inherited will. Inherited will is not a cute slogan. It's the operating system of this story. Roger to Luffy, Odin to Momonosuke, Joy Boy to the one who will come. Every time someone dies in One Piece, somebody else stands up and says, I'll carry it on. And the fandom treats that as pure emotion. Dreams, ideals, vibes. But listen to me. In this series will almost always come stapled to hardware. Think about it. Tom doesn't just pass on a dream of the sea. He leaves behind the Oro Jackson and the blueprints to Pluton. Odin doesn't only pass on open the borders, he passes Wano itself as a locked vault, plus the knowledge of the road poneglyph. Joy Boy doesn't just apologize to a mermaid princess. He leaves Noah, a literal continent-sized ship parked under Fishman Island. These are not Hallmark cards. These are actionable legacies, which means when we say Joy Boy's will, we should not be picturing a sad ghost asking for closure. We should be picturing a multi-part plan that got frozen mid-execution. History on the poneglyphs. Technology in the ancient weapons. Geography in the red stones that form a coordinate system. All of that converging on Laugh Tale, where the One Piece sits as the final activation key. Not the whole machine. The last piece you need to turn the machine on. Now go back to those famous old men speeches the community loves to quote. Whitebeard. One day, someone will come carrying centuries of history on their shoulders, and they will challenge the world. Rayleigh at Sabaody. We did it too early. You might be able to do it. Roger, laughing on Laugh Tale, saying they were too early to do anything. They are not just predicting a cool kid with a strong punch. They are predicting someone who will have the missing components to operate a system they could only understand, not fire. And here's the thing. If they expect the world to be turned upside down, that implies a concrete mechanism. You don't flip a planet with a speech. You do it with Pluton under Wano, Poseidon under the sea, Uranus in the sky, and a final key on Laugh-Tale that unites them into one world-scale reset button. Which leads to the uncomfortable part. Inheriting the One Piece is not just inheriting a dream. It's inheriting the right and the responsibility to decide whether to pull a trigger Roger explicitly refused to pull. I need you to sit with how insane that is in writing terms. The author has spent decades foreshadowing Luffy as the guy who punches tyrants, not the guy who erases systems. So when that kid finally stands in front of a completed Joy Boy system, we need to ask a new question. Is inherited will about repeating the plan or about breaking it? Because the answer to that decides whether the end of One Piece is liberation or controlled demolition. And Oda has already put the test case on the board. East Blue Seeds. The first hints. The One Piece is bigger than gold, and Oda has already put the test case on the board. Because if inherited will is a question, East Blue is where he quietly hands you the answer key and dares you not to notice. I need you to go all the way back to Loguetown in our memories, to the very first time we even hear the phrase One Piece. Roger on the scaffold, grinning at his own execution. And what does he actually say? He doesn't yell, "There's a mountain of gold, go nuts." He talks about his treasure, everything this world has to offer, and then hands the entire planet a permission slip. Go to sea, chase it, be free. That speech doesn't foreshadow a payday. It foreshadows an era. The very next panel, the crowd doesn't start calculating interest rates. They lose their minds, and the Great Pirate Era detonates on the spot. The focus of the writing is on the chain reaction, not the chest at the end. That's Oda, day one, framing the One Piece as a world-scale switch you can flip, not a vault you can crack. Here's the thing, the important characters react to that in-story exactly the way you're supposed to as a reader. Shanks doesn't sit in a bar bragging about how he'll buy a mansion. He talks about the age Roger created, the seas going wild, the romance of betting your life on a journey. Mihawk shows up in East Blue, sees a rookie with a tiny bounty, and his whole monologue is about this turbulent era and interesting times, not about racing to the finish line for cash. Even the early Marines, from Smoker to Sengoku in flashbacks, complain about the chaos Roger unleashed. Their problem is the age, not the asset. And then, to make sure the community doesn't miss the category difference, Oda throws Buggy at your face. Buggy is the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and calls it One Piece. He's obsessed with treasure in the most literal, clownish way possible. He hoards gold, screams about maps, and measures success in coins. This is not a sin. This is normal pirate fiction. But Oda is intentionally using him as parody, as a gag reel of the simplistic interpretation, so that when you hear One Piece in the serious scenes, you already feel it sits in a different storytelling category entirely. Meanwhile, your protagonist? Luffy never once says, "I want to be rich." His dream is a job title and a condition. Pirate King, the freest man on the sea. The One Piece is a credential, a keycard, proof that you reach the system's control room and can do something to the world, not something for your bank account. All of that is East Blue. That's the tutorial. And if the tutorial is this loaded, then when we finally start tying the One Piece to ancient weapons and void century tech, we need to ask a much scarier question. What exactly does that keycard unlock? Loguetown and the inherited era. Roger's execution as a loaded gun. So when we go back to Loguetown with that keycard idea in your head, Roger's death scene stops being a cool origin myth and starts reading like a controlled detonation. He's smiling on the scaffold. The crowd is frothing. The Marines are pretending this is justice. But the camera, the narration, the way Oda frames those final words, that's not a slip. That's a man pulling a trigger he's been polishing since Laugh-Tale. He doesn't accidentally blurt out, "My treasure? It's yours if you can find it." He waits. He picks his moment. He chooses wording that weaponizes the entire crowd. That is intentional storytelling. In universe, it's an intentional act of terrorism against the status quo. If the One Piece were just a mountain of gold and some cool hats, This is insane behavior. You don't scatter poneglyph clues across the globe and taunt the world government for a flex on your net worth. Here's the thing. The only way Roger's choice makes sense is if he needs variables he didn't have. Different era, different people, different D. He's not advertising a bank vault. He's seeding a recruitment exam for someone who can actually use the system he found. The poneglyph network, the ancient weapons, the true history. All of that becomes a filter. If you can reach Laugh Tale, you've proved you're the kind of monster who can press the button he couldn't. And Oda flags this as politically radioactive right away. Smoker is there, the grumpy embodiment of marine justice, watching the whole thing and having his worldview shattered in real time. Dragon is there, the future world's most wanted revolutionary, cloaked in storm clouds, literally blowing the execution town apart. Revolution, Marines, piracy, all three major forces of the story converge on the exact frame where Roger fires off his last words. That's not coincidence. That's the author quietly telling you. This is not just a pirate origin story. This is a regime change event. Pattern interrupt. Remember, Roger turned himself in. The man who outsailed the entire navy walks into custody. Why? Because after Laugh Tale he says, "We were too early." Too early for what? Too early to deploy the weapon. Too early to pull off the plan the ancient kingdom started. So he rewrites his own death as a beacon. He becomes an inherited will lighthouse, broadcasting to future Joy Boys. Here's the route, here's the key card, finish the job. From a craft perspective, this is where we need to separate categories. This isn't vague foreshadowing Oda might pay off someday. This is pre-writing plus foreshadowing. The author has already decided the One Piece is tied to world-scale change, void century, ancient weapons, all of it, and then uses Loguetown as the first public trailer. Later arcs can adjust the exact weapon mechanics. This is fine. This is normal. But the function of the One Piece? That was planned. And once you see Roger's execution as a loaded gun, every later mention of inherited will stops being poetic and starts sounding dangerously operational. Alabasta and Pluton. Our first explicit world-ending weapon. And once you realize Loguetown is a loaded gun, we need to talk about the first time Oda literally puts a nuke on the table and dares you to still call this a treasure hunt. I'm talking about Alabasta. I need you to actually remember what that arc is about, not the sand, not the dance powder discourse, but the Pluton problem sitting under the whole thing. Crocodile is not trying to rob a vault. He's not chasing gold. His entire conspiracy is built around two assets, a poneglyph in Alabasta and a set of blueprints hidden with Iceberg and Tom's apprentices. His plan is simple in premise and insane in scale. Seize the kingdom, force Cobra to reveal Pluton's location, and then either awaken or construct a warship that can erase islands. Not metaphorically. In the story's own terms, Pluton is the world's worst battleship, a ship whose mere existence terrifies the world government. Cobra's fear isn't, "Oh no, our national treasure will be stolen." It's, "If this thing is real and it's here, our country is a loaded gun pointed at the planet." He cooperates with the government not because he's a bootlicker, but because the author frames Pluton as a weapon so dangerous that even a relatively decent king is willing to help the people who nuked O'Hara just to keep it buried. That's the storytelling priority. The moral axis isn't wealth, it's who controls the trigger. And then you have Robin. At this point in the story, she's the only person in the world we know who can read the stone. Crocodile doesn't need her because she's a good archaeologist. He needs her because she is the interface for a weapon. The poneglyph in Alabasta. It's not the true history. Robin even lies to Crocodile about it. What it actually records is information on Pluton. That's crucial. Our first on-screen poneglyph is not a lore dump for fans. It's a technical manual for an ancient WMD. Here's the thing. That immediately tells you the poneglyph network is not just a cute collectible side quest. It's infrastructure. It's a distributed database for world-scale tools. Pluton here, Poseidon later with Shirahoshi, Uranus somewhere off-screen. Alabasta is the moment Oda quietly shifts categories. Ancient tech is not treasure, it's leverage. It can reshape the balance of power or just delete it. This is not a sin. This is not Oda changing his mind later. This is pre-writing. He's building a weaponized layer under the adventure story, and Pluton is the prototype. Hidden under a kingdom, tied to forbidden script, feared by the government, capable of flipping the world order with a single bad decision. Tell me that doesn't sound suspiciously close to how the One Piece itself keeps being teased. So when fans insist the One Piece is just gold and a good laugh, listen to me. Alabasta is already running the software that the final island will use. Pluton is Chekhov's battleship. The One Piece is going to be Chekhov's system, which means the next step is to zoom out from one ship to the entire ancient weapons network and see how all three are clearly designed as a single, pre-planned mechanism. Skypiea's bell and the sky poneglyph. Joy Boy's first fingerprint. So when I say Chekhov's system, I need you to zoom out from Alabasta for a second and go up. Way up. Because the first time Oda really shows his hand on this isn't down in some secret government bunker. It's in a cloud island with a giant golden doorbell. Skypiea's climax is one of those moments the community loves to file under cool payoff, emotional, moving on. Luffy punches a nail, falls from the sky, and rings that massive golden bell. The sound and the light arc across the clouds all the way down to Jaya, telling Cricket, hey, your ancestor wasn't a liar. That's the surface story. That's the tourist brochure version. But buried under Shandora's ruins, Robin is reading the real thing that rang. Because here's the thing. That bell is literally attached to a poneglyph. Not a random lore rock. The Shandora poneglyph. The one Robin expects to mention Pluton or Poseidon. Some obvious weapon keyword she can file into her ancient weapons folder. Instead, it talks about history. And then she finds something that should not be there. WEAPON.Roger's handwriting. This is where you and I need to stop being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and actually read what the author put on the page. Robin explicitly notes the inscription isn't about Pluton. It isn't about Poseidon. It's not a weapon spec sheet. It's a historical log with a graffiti tag from the previous Pirate King. And we know from Rayleigh and Odin that Roger could not read poneglyphs when he first hit the sea. His crew had to bring the patch notes. So if Roger's message is carved on the sky poneglyph, that means at some point he sailed with someone who could read and write this script and intentionally use that ability to talk to the future. That's Kozuki Odin. That's Wano's stone carving clan. That's a guy literally hired as a walking Rosetta Stone. Roger isn't on a treasure scavenger hunt. He's leaving sticky notes on a global hard drive for the next user. Once you see that, Shandora stops being a one-off adventure and starts reading as Joy Boy's first fingerprint on the network. The stones are not random. Some hold history, some hold coordinates, some hold weapon data, but all of them are clearly part of a single distributed system. You don't scatter indestructible monoliths across the planet unless you're planning a final coordinated action that needs every piece online. Skypiea is where the One Piece stops feeling like the last chest on the map and starts feeling intentional, almost mechanical. Joy Boy built the circuit. Roger traced the wiring, rang the bell, and proved the line still carries a signal. But he couldn't throw the final switch. He was, in his own words, too early. The question is, too early for what? Because the next islands answer that, and the answer makes Laugh Tale sound a lot less like a punchline and a lot more like a launch code. Water 7, Eni's Lobby, and the ethics of burning a blueprint. And where do we go right after Roger tells us he was too early to flip the switch? Straight into an arc where the entire plot revolves around a different switch the world has been terrified of for centuries. Pluton. Water 7 and Eni's Lobby are not just about Robin's trauma or the Going Merry's funeral. They're about inheritance paperwork for an apocalypse engine. Tom builds the Oro Jackson. He also safeguards Pluton's blueprints, physical receipts for a ship that can erase islands. When the government comes for him, he doesn't hand them over. He passes them down. First to Iceberg, then to Cutty Flam, the idiot shipwright who is suddenly holding the end of the world in a briefcase. CP9's whole mission is not catch Robin, it's recover the blueprints at any cost. The world government is so desperate they embed assassins for years, hollow out Water 7's political structure, and are willing to burn a city just to get a copy of plans that technically shouldn't even exist. That's not treasure hunting, that's containment breach procedure. And then Franky does the stupidest, smartest thing anyone in this story has done. He burns them. In front of Spandam, in front of the Straw Hats, in front of the narrative. Listen to me. That's not just a cool character beat. That is Oda taking a category of information and saying, this does not get to circulate. Franky decides that having 2 routes to Pluton is 1 route too many. The poneglyphs already hold the recipe. If fate, or history, or Joy Boy's pre-writing really demands Pluton, it will be built through that intentional, singular path. Not because some government spook stole a filing cabinet. Here's the thing. This frames ancient weapons as moral burdens, not prizes. The question isn't who can find it first. It's who, if anyone, is allowed to have the power to redraw the map of the planet. Is the responsible move to destroy the option entirely, or to quarantine it for a future inheritor you will never meet? Franky's answer is brutal. He says, I am not the one. I am too early. I'm not trusted with this. Sound familiar? Roger reaches Laughtail, reads the true history, stands in the control room of the world, and walks away laughing. Not because it's a joke, but because he has the same instinct Franky has on that bridge. He refuses to be the one to fire the gun. He kicks the problem forward, sparks the great pirate era, and waits for someone who can actually carry that ethical weight. I need you to see how consistent this is. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, the One Piece. These are not 4 separate MacGuffins. They're one storytelling category, morally loaded mechanisms. The narrative keeps treating them as launch codes, not loot drops. Pattern interrupt. What if the punchline of One Piece is that the treasure is just the master key to all of this? Because once you see Franky on that bridge, burning the backup copy, Roger's too early stops sounding romantic and starts sounding exactly the same. And if that's true, then whoever actually turns the key, yeah, that's our next problem. Fishman Island and Poseidon. When weapon means a person, whoever turns the key is our next problem. And Fishman Island is where Oda quietly tells you what turning the key actually means. Because then we meet Shirahoshi. Sweet, anxious, cries at everything Shirahoshi. And the story drops the line that broke my brain on reread. She isn't just a princess, she is Poseidon. Not has Poseidon, is Poseidon. An ancient weapon. Her power? She can command sea kings, the same monsters we spent hundreds of chapters treating as random ocean jump scares. Except now, the author looks you in the eye and says, these things can sink fleets, crush islands, and, if pointed correctly, probably erase continents. Here's the thing. The community kept calling Poseidon a weapon, and then mentally filing her next to Pluton as big gun, scary boom. This is not a sin. This is normal. You see the word weapon, your pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast goes, ah yes, super nuke. But Fishman Island is Oda standing over your shoulder going, no, pay attention, this is a control system. Shirahoshi doesn't shoot lasers, she issues commands. The Sea Kings are the artillery, she's the interface, and the story will not shut up about how that interface gets used. Neptune spells it out. Poseidon can either bring ruin to the world or guide Noah and fulfill Joy Boy's promise. Same power, same Sea Kings, different user, different timing. The moral valence isn't in the beam, it's in the hand and the calendar. Neptune's whole parenting style is, please don't be kidnapped by a warlord and turned into an apocalypse button. Meanwhile, the Sea Kings themselves are doing prophecy podcast commentary. They talk about that day when their queen's voice will be needed, how they came too early once, how the promised time is tied to someone reaching the surface, to the One Piece, to a ship that will finally move when the right person appears. I need you to clock how specific that is, not someday someone's strong. A scheduled event, a planned rendezvous between a person-shaped key and a world-scale mechanism. So we need to update the category in our heads. Ancient weapon in One Piece terms isn't big canon. It's admin login for planetary forces. Poseidon is user access to Sea Kings. Pluton is user access to an island-killing warship system buried under Wano. Uranus is almost certainly user access to something even broader. Weather, sky, orbit, whatever nightmare Oda cooked up in his notes. The weapon is the interface. The world is the gun. And once you see that, the One Piece stops reading as treasure and starts reading as the master credential. Not a bomb, but the control key that syncs all three weapons and the ancient kingdom's tech into one coordinated world editing operation. The laugh at Laugh Tale becomes the horrible realization that Roger found the dashboard and didn't have the right user profile. Which raises the real question. What happens when the guy whose dream is freedom, not domination, finally logs in? O'Hara, Vegapunk, and the one shot to change the world. Because here's the thing. Once you realize Laugh Tale is a control room, you suddenly remember there was an earlier attempt to even find the blueprint. O'Hara, the island where the world's biggest One Piece theory subreddit was run by actual professionals. And the world government didn't argue with them. They didn't debunk them. They dropped a buster call on their faces. The Tree of Knowledge is Oda's way of telling you that information alone is a weapon category. These weren't pirates with doomsday cannons. They were librarians. But the moment they got too close to the Void Century, the moment they started piecing together that the ancient kingdom and the weapons and the poneglyphs formed a single system, the author has the government respond with overwhelming, pre-planned force. No debate, no trial, just erase the save file. Why? Because those scholars believe something very specific. That uncovering the true history wouldn't just be academically interesting, it would be materially destabilizing. One decisive revelation that could delegitimize the entire world government overnight. Not gradually raise awareness. Flip a switch. You don't nuke people for mild foreshadowing. You nuke people who might find the red button. Fast forward to Vegapunk, the world's smartest pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast and then reverse engineers the toaster. He digs into the same history O'Hara died for, and he reaches the same conclusion but from the opposite direction. He's not a romantic scholar, he's an engineer, and what terrifies him isn't just the truth, it's what happens when someone uses it. Vegapunk spells it out on Egghead. If the full picture gets out and someone acts on it, we're not talking about a minor regime change. We're talking about a global war, a hard reset, a world physically rearranged. He treats knowledge plus ancient weapons as a one-shot device. Fire it once, and the board state of the planet is permanently different. There's no undo. So I need you to connect those two perspectives. O'Hara's faith that the truth could topple the government, and Vegapunk's fear that the same truth, combined with the right technology, could topple the entire world. Both of them are circling the same planned mechanism. Decode the full poneglyph network, understand the weapons as a coordinated system, and you get a narrow window where one actor can rewrite reality. Which brings us back to Roger's too early line. He had the history, he had the dashboard, but no Poseidon awakened, no Pluton deployed, no Uranus confirmed, no global community of allies who even knew what was at stake. The conditions column on the spreadsheet was just a wall of zeros. Pulling the trigger then would have been a pointless suicide note. Listen to me. The One Piece is the thing that turns all of that. History, weapons, inherited wills, environmental timing, into a single executable action. That's why scholars die for it. That's why Vegapunk panics about it. Laugh Tale isn't dangerous because it's funny. It's dangerous because when the right person finally logs in, they don't just read the story. They choose the ending. And the terrifying part is, Oda's already told us who wrote the script for that final choice. Zoo and the road poneglyphs. A guided missile to Laugh Tale. Because here's the thing. Once you realize somebody wrote the script, you also have to ask who programmed the lock. And Zoo is where Oda basically walks on stage, holds up the keyring and goes, by the way, Laugh Tale is password protected. Road poneglyphs are not normal foreshadowing. They're not cute Easter eggs. They're 4 giant red monoliths scattered to the corners of the world, whose coordinates only mean anything when you stack them together, and they resolve into a single point. Laugh Tale. That's already weird. But then you notice entire civilizations have organized their religion, their politics, their isolationist foreign policy around guarding one line of that equation. The minks on Zoo. Generations of warrior furballs living on the back of a wandering elephant, sworn to protect a stone they can't even read. Wano's Kazuki clan? Centuries of closed borders and persecution because they alone can carve and interpret poneglyphs. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is an author telling you, in neon, that the treasure map is actually an access protocol. And the generational part is where it stops being romantic and starts feeling scheduled. Pedro dies talking about the dawn. Inuarashi and Nekomamushi spend 20 years holding Odin's pose, literally waiting for the one Odin bet on. They're not surprised the Straw Hats show up. They're relieved. I need you to see the category difference there. They weren't guarding a prize for whoever stumbled in. They were babysitting a rendezvous point for a specific future crew. Remember how they react to hearing about Roger? They already ran this program once. They guided one Joy Boy candidate to Laugh Tale, watched him laugh, watched him turn back, and instead of going, "Welp, job done," they reset the timer for the next generation. Inuarashi and Nekomamushi's entire character is, we will follow Odin's will to the next one. That's not a destination. That's a scheduled meeting. Pattern interrupt. Imagine if your Google Maps only unlocks the final turn, if 3 different friends in 3 different countries all hit share location at the same time. That's what this system is. Multiple keys. Multiple custodians. All designed to prevent some random, ambitious pirate from speedrunning Armageddon. So when fans treat the road poneglyphs as a quirky scavenger hunt, we need to stop and ask. Scavenger hunts don't usually require hereditary stonemasons, a talking elephant, and a bloodline mermaid weapon. This looks a lot less treasure map, a lot more safety lock on something the world government is terrified of. You don't distribute 4 launch codes across rival factions unless the thing they unlock is catastrophic. And this is where Roger's too early line stops being poetic and becomes mechanical. In Roger's era, Poseidon isn't born yet. Shirahoshi doesn't exist. Wano is still sealed, Pluton is still entombed, the great ship to carry the world's peoples isn't launched, the circuit isn't complete. Even with all 4 road poneglyphs, he's missing active weapons, missing an open Wano, missing the social conditions Joy Boy's system expects. Roger doesn't fail a courage check. He fails a version check. The software won't run, which means when Luffy finally assembles those same stones, he won't just be arriving somewhere Roger couldn't. He'll be booting up a program the previous Pirate King was literally locked out of. Wano's Pluton reveal. A warship buried under a closed country. And nowhere is that software won't run idea more literal than Wano. Because Wano isn't just a cool samurai backdrop, it's a hard drive, it's a vault, it's a country-shaped safety lock built around an ancient weapon. Here's the thing. When Oda finally pulls the curtain back, Pluton is not some abstract myth. It's physically under Wano. The country is literally sitting on a warship. And the only reason that warship isn't currently deleting continents is because Wano, in an act of deliberate national self-harm, walled itself off and sealed the weapon away. You don't get Pluton without opening the borders. You don't open the borders without choosing to risk Pluton. That's the part I need you to sit with. Because for 20 years, open Wano's borders sounded to a lot of fans like end isolationism, get McDonald's, maybe a Starbucks. Modernization, trade, friendship, yay. But Odin's journal and Toki's prophecy are crystal clear. This isn't a tourism campaign, this is a countdown. Odin doesn't say, I want my people to experience globalization. He says the borders must be opened for a particular future moment, for a particular future figure tied to Joy Boy. So the writing quietly reframes the whole thing. Opening Wano is not morally neutral. It is a conscious, timed decision to unseal a weapon whose activation window is synced to one era and one person. You are not just saying we should be less racist. You are saying we are willing to put a doomsday battleship back on the table because the person it was meant for is finally here. That's not foreshadowing as a vague vibe. That's infrastructure waiting for a user login. And then you remember, Roger was there. He sails into Wano, reads the poneglyphs, learns about Pluton's existence and the closed country lock, and what does he do? He leaves. He does not strong-arm Odin into a coup. He does not tear down the walls. He does not force the open borders equals unleash Pluton event flag to trigger early. The man who could start the Great Pirate era on a whim looks at this weapon and says essentially, not my time, not my button. Listen to me. That is intentional characterization through world building. Oda is telling you that even with the knowledge, even with the root, the correct move for Roger's generation is restraint. The problem isn't courage. The problem is timing. The program is installed under Wano. The admin account just hasn't logged in yet. So Wano's Pluton reveal becomes your cleanest example of how the One Piece system is architected. These are not loose nukes scattered around for whoever grabs them first. They're weapons buried under nations, under politics, under moral choices that entire cultures have to opt into. You don't find Pluton. A country decides to release it. And if that's how a side weapon works, what does that tell you about the main executable waiting on Laughtail? Egghead's bombshells, Vegapunk, Mother Flame, and the true stakes. And Egghead is where Oda stops hinting and just holds the blueprint up to the camera. Vegapunk isn't a mysterious silhouette or a lore tweet anymore. He's an old man on a death call telling you, in plain language, I read the Void Century and then accidentally rebuilt it. His whole research career is him reverse engineering the ancient kingdom, from giant robots to energy systems, and the world government nodding along. Right up until he gets too close to the original intent. Then they send a kill squad and turn the island into a live fire demonstration, because Mother Flame is not subtle. It's an artificial sun, a concentrated energy core that can be tapped to power miracles or, whoops, Uranus-style island erasure. We watch Emu and the Gorosi take that stolen sample and delete Lulusha off the map. One shot, no warning, no fallout discussion, just a test fire. And if your brain didn't immediately go, oh, that's an ancient weapon in everything but brand name, I need you to schedule an appointment with your inner pattern-seeking monkey because it's asleep at the wheel. Here's the thing. Thematically, Mother Flame is a rhyme. The ancient weapons are natural or mythic sources of absurd power. Poseidon as a mermaid, Pluton as a ship, Uranus as a sky god device. Mother Flame is the industrial remake. Centralized, bottled catastrophe that whoever holds the key can channel into whatever delivery system they want. The category is the same. The difference is only whether the author slaps forbidden legend or cutting-edge science on the label. And Vegapunk is terrified of that. Not just in a, oh no, my laser got used for bad things, Marvel scientist way. His whole Egghead broadcast is him admitting, I chase the same questions as the ancient kingdom. I touch the same power, but without their ideals, without their politics, my inventions default to whatever the world government wants. He's worried he's rebuilding either their original weapons or their countermeasures, but stripped of the philosophy that made those tools worth existing. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda making the problem explicit. The world already has, or can quickly rebuild, multiple tools of mass destruction. Pluton in Wano's basement, Poseidon growing up in Fishman Island, Uranus in the sky apparently online, Mother Flame in a test phase. Raw power is solved. The bottleneck is the operating system that decides when the trigger gets pulled. So when fans still insist the One Piece is just gold or a gag, I need you to remember Egghead. The story is screaming that the missing piece isn't another bomb. It's the master key, the thing that can synchronize, authorize, or brick every world-scale weapon on the board. That's why the world government doesn't just fear someone reading history, they fear someone reaching Laugh-Tale and installing the update. And if that's true, then Luffy isn't just hunting treasure, he's walking toward root access on reality, which raises one very uncomfortable question the story has been dodging for 1,000 chapters. Joy Boy's infrastructure, a planet-sized puzzle box. So here's that uncomfortable question. What kind of story hides a root-level update behind cartoon pirates and goofy rubber powers? Because when you zoom out, Joy Boy's era didn't just leave lore. It left infrastructure. It left a planet-sized puzzle box that our pattern-seeking monkey brains keep treating as fun world-building instead of active machine. Run the components. We have the poneglyph network, historical stones, road stones, scattered across the map in a way that forces you to sail the whole world to assemble a single narrative. We have the ancient weapons, Pluton under Wano, Poseidon born on Fishman Island, Uranus still in the fog, all framed as tools that can literally change the world. We have national fates, Wano's closed borders, Fishman Island's promise to move to the surface, and we have the weirdly loyal allies baked into that geography, Minks on Zoo, Kozuki in Wano, Shandians in Skypiea. Now listen to me, because this is where the foreshadowing stops being cute trivia and starts looking intentional in a terrifying way. Each of those categories is doing double duty. A poneglyph isn't just a history textbook, it's an instruction manual hidden inside a safe. An ancient weapon isn't just a Chekhov's gun, it's the actual force you need once you follow those instructions. The nations aren't just colourful settings, they're staging grounds, launch pads, and political cover for when someone finally hits execute. Here's the thing. That's not random. That's not an author going, oh hey, Sky Island would be fun this year. That reads as a system that was deliberately broken into parts. History in one place, keys in another, power somewhere else. Custodians embedded in bloodlines and cultures so the world government can't grab the whole thing in one raid. Joy Boy's era basically took a single world reset mechanism and exploded it across continents so no single idiot with a crown could speedrun the apocalypse. Pattern interrupt. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact what you do when you're an ancient superpower, staring down the barrel of your own extinction. You pre-write a contingency plan. You hard-code redundancies. You make it so the system only boots up when a very specific configuration of people, ideals, and timing appears again. Which brings us to Laugh-Tale. If the world is a distributed machine, Laugh-Tale is the control room. It's the place where all the cables converge, the complete history, the full schematic of the ancient weapons, the explanation of why Wano has to open, why Fishman Island has to rise, why the Minks and Kozuki and Shandians were all carrying pieces of the same dead kingdom's will. The One Piece isn't the machine, it's the master key in the dashboard. And Roger got there. He saw the whole board. He and Odin read the manuals, traced the wiring, realized exactly what Joy Boy had built. And he laughed. Not because it was a joke, but because he could finally see how underqualified he was. Wrong era, wrong allies, missing weapons, missing prophecies fulfilled. He had the control room with no power routed in. I need you to sit with that, because it means Luffy isn't chasing a treasure chest. He's walking toward a decision switch. And the scary part is what that switch is actually wired to do. Roger, at Laugh-Tale, the man who found the gun but lacked the bullets. So we need to go back and actually walk through how he got there, because the journey to Laugh Tale reads very differently once you treat it as a man assembling a weapon he already suspects he can't fire. Roger doesn't just trip and fall onto the final island, he systematically hunts road poneglyphs. He pulls Big Mum's imprint, he invades Zoo's sacred space, he drags his terminally ill body across the Grand Line with Odin specifically, because Odin can read the script. This is not a vibe-based cruise, this is an intentional data-gathering operation run by a dying man on a clock. And when they finally follow those coordinates and hit the last island, what happens? They don't just find a big gold pile and a crown. They get the full Void Century download, the ancient kingdom, Joy Boy's apology, the system of ancient weapons, the promise that someone will carry on the plan. The story tells you this in pieces through Odin's flashback, through early.You, through Roger's own words. The author has been quietly filing this under world-scale mechanism, not Dragon Ball Wish. Now, the community loves to meme the crew reaction. They get there, they read everything, and they burst out laughing. They name it Laugh Tale. Fans go, "Oh, so it was all a joke, treasure chest of memes, got it." Listen to me. People do not weep and laugh at the same time because the punchline was no treasure. They break down because the irony is unbearable. You cross the planet, you solve the greatest mystery in history, and you realize you are holding the blueprint to a gun your era physically cannot load. Here's the thing, that "we were too early" line is not poetic fluff. It's a technical diagnosis. Poseidon, not born yet in Shirahoshi. Pluton, still entombed in a closed Wano. Uranus, completely off the table. Wano's borders sealed, Fishman Island still under the thumb of discrimination. No straw hat level coalition, no revolutionary momentum. The plan Joy Boy left is a multi-part system, and Roger is missing half the components. So use the gun metaphor properly. Roger reaches the control room. He finds the main console, the master key, the targeting schematic for the red line and the world seas. But the ammunition, Poseidon's Sea Kings, Pluton's ship, whatever Uranus actually is either unborn, asleep, or inaccessible. If he pulls the trigger now, best case scenario is a misfire. Worst case is random, partial destruction that doesn't free anyone and hands the world government an excuse for permanent fascist lockdown. And that's where his choice actually matters. I need you to stop treating the Great Pirate era as a fun little retirement flex. If the One Piece is just treasure, his decision to walk away is cowardice or nonsense. If the One Piece is a weaponized system he could technically activate but shouldn't, then sparking a global scramble for successors becomes the only morally defensible move. This is not a sin in storytelling terms. This is pre-writing. The author planned a scenario where the first man to reach the gun can't fire it, so he instead turns the entire world into a contest to find the one idiot whose era, allies, and ideals make pulling that trigger survivable. And that raises the real problem we have to talk about next. What happens when the idiot is Luffy, whose dream is freedom, not responsible ownership of a planet-killing device? Too early versus too weak. Why Roger's limitation wasn't power. So before you picture Luffy tripping into a doomsday button, we need to clear up the Roger thing, because the community has this weird headcanon that he just wasn't strong enough. As if the One Piece is a gym membership he couldn't quite max out on. Listen to me. This man was Pirate King. He was trading blows with Whitebeard. He was Garp's "we almost killed each other" rival. He was walking Conqueror's Haki nuclear fallout. In the internal power scaling fanfic we all run in our heads, he's already S tier. If the requirement to use the One Piece were hit a certain combat level, Roger qualifies in episode 1 of his life. So when he stands on Laugh Tale, learns the true history, and walks away saying, "we were too early," that is not code for "I need more gains." That's Oda very intentionally carving a different category of limitation. Not power. Position. Look at how Rayleigh talks about him. He doesn't say, Roger chickened out, or he didn't have the guts to pull the trigger. He says Roger respected the weight of that truth. He chose to kick off the great pirate era instead of speedrunning Armageddon. That's a moral decision, not a DPS check. That's an author telling you the problem wasn't courage, it was context. Because here's the thing. Roger's era is missing half the puzzle pieces that we now know are baked into Joy Boy's endgame. There is no Shirahoshi yet. Poseidon literally hasn't been born. There is no Luffy-style alliance web where Fishman Island, Alabasta, Dressrosa, Wano, Zoo, and whoever else are all emotionally and politically tethered to one idiot in a straw hat. The Revolutionary Army is Dragon with a hoodie and a dream, not a global insurgency. Wano is still closed, its Pluton-shaped Chekhov's gun sealed underground. If you're paying attention to the foreshadowing trail, the pattern is obvious. Skypiea quietly introduces sky islands and ancient technology. Zoo reveals the road poneglyph network. Fishman Island drops the Poseidon is a person bomb. Wano locks Pluton under national isolation. Egghead starts whispering about a mother flame tier energy source and a weapon that already erased an island. An author does not stack that many world-scale mechanisms accidentally. So the most reasonable read is that the One Piece isn't a single shiny object, it's the master key to a synchronized system. Ancient weapons in place. Certain kingdoms opened, certain bloodlines awakened. A critical mass of nations and movements ready to defect from the world government the second the signal goes out. You don't just flip that switch whenever you feel spicy. You need the board set. Roger's limitation, then, is structural and moral. Structurally, the network Joy Boy designed simply did not exist yet. Morally, Roger refused to gamble the entire planet on a half-charged doomsday ritual. He could have tried to brute force it, sure. He could have been the guy who pressed every button and hoped the ancient UI had a safety. Instead, he turned the world into a recruitment drive for the one successor whose era, allies, and ideals might make using that weapon survivable. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question you're already thinking. What happens when that successor is Luffy, whose entire storytelling category is freedom gremlin, not responsible steward of a world reset machine? Luffy's dream and the ethics of owning a world reset button. So here's the problem. You don't hand a nuclear launch console to the guy whose stated life goal is meat and vibes, and call that responsible succession planning. Because remember, Luffy's dream is not Pirate King. That's the job title. The dream is that extra sentence Oda keeps censoring. The one Ace and Sabo heard and immediately burst out laughing. The one that makes the entire crew react with that mix of horror, fondness, and oh my god, he's serious. Whatever exact wording you headcanon, the shape is clear. Something childishly grand that involves everyone, the whole world, sharing in some ridiculous freedom high. Now put that next to the category of thing we've been arguing the One Piece actually is. A world-scale weapon system, a void century UI that can literally reset the board. Here's the thing. On paper, that's a terrible combo. The community loves to say, well, Luffy's good, so it's fine. No. Good is not a safety feature. Good is how you get a well-intentioned idiot pressing buttons because it'll make everyone smile. And yet, this is exactly where Oda's intentional writing is flexing. Joy Boy failed. Roger was too early. Everyone up to now either lacked the power, the information, or the moral orientation to use this thing the way it was planned to be used. Luffy is the first protagonist in this chain whose entire storytelling category is Freedom Gremlin who refuses to own anything except his hat. That's not an accident. That's pre-writing. Watch the pattern. Skypiea offers him a literal golden bell and a Sky Island throne. He rings the bell to send a message to a skeleton whale and then bounces. Dressrosa hands him a country and a hero narrative. He pieces out, leaves the toys and politics to the people actually from there. Wano ends with Momonosuke begging him to stay as a symbolic guardian. Luffy sails away the second the borders are their choice, not his. Over and over, the story foreshadows one thing. Give this man a crown, and he will eat it before he wears it. I need you to see how intentional that is when we start talking about a world reset button. If anyone is going to inherit the ancient equivalent of delete system 32, it has to be the one person who genuinely does not want to rule the operating system. This is not a sin in the writing, this is the safety mechanism. The author has been running a 1,000-chapter background check, but that doesn't dodge the real problem. At the end, Luffy is still going to stand in front of something that can erase or remake the world. He will know what the Void Century was, what the Ancient Kingdom tried, what the world government did in response, and he will have to answer the question Joy Boy and Roger both failed. Do you press it? Do you flood the world, raise the Ancient Kingdom, trigger whatever great cleansing Vegapunk is terrified of? Or do you walk away and trust the messy, unfair present to fix itself? This is fine when it's punching celestial dragons. This is normal shonen ethics. But when the prank is planetary, when making everyone laugh might mean drowning half the map to free the other half, what does freedom even mean? And more importantly, what happens if Luffy's answer is wrong on purpose? Ancient weapons and the One Piece, separate tools or one system. So if freedom can be wrong on purpose, we need to ask the uncomfortable question the story's been tiptoeing around for 20 years. What exactly is Luffy being handed at the finish line? A crown or a trigger? Here's the thing. The story already gave us a vocabulary for that trigger. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus. 3 ancient weapons. 3 very different flavors of, you can absolutely end the world with this. Pluton is a battleship blueprint in Water 7 and an actual dormant warship under Wano, framed as a single shot that can erase an island. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, a person who can command sea kings, those continent-sized monsters that can casually drag Noah across the ocean. Uranus is still off in the fog, but every hint tethers it to the sky, to weather, to whatever was nuking Lulusia from orbit. So the community does what it always does. It makes categories. Theory 1. The One Piece is a 4th ancient weapon. The secret final gun Oda's been hiding under the table. Theory 2. The One Piece is the operating system, the control panel, the master key that coordinates those 3 and all the leftover Joy Boy infrastructure. Either the treasure is another nuke, or it's the launch console. Listen to me. That first category is the boring one. Greatest treasure in the world is actually a bigger cannon. That's not just thematically flat, it's redundant. We already have 3 different ways to delete continents. The author has spent decades foreshadowing them, naming them, staging moral debates around them. Adding a 4th is the storytelling equivalent of DLC you didn't need. The second option? That's where it gets terrifying in a way that actually matches the stakes of the Void Century. If Joy Boy's era scattered weapons, blueprints, poneglyphs, and prophecies across the map, then Laugh Tale is where all those threads plug in. Not another toy. The interface. The place where Pluton under Wano, Poseidon in Fishman Island, Uranus in the sky, plus whatever Vegapunk is resurrecting, all resolve into a single intentional choice. Pattern interrupt. What if the One Piece is literally a menu? Not a chest, not a sword, but a system prompt. Do you wish to synchronize? Do you wish to fire? Do you wish to shut it all down? Suddenly Roger's "we were too early" isn't vague romanticism. It's a man who saw the cursor blinking on that screen and realized the world outside wasn't ready to answer. I need you to see how clean this is structurally. Every road trip to a poneglyph, every lecture from Rayleigh, every warning from Vegapunk is foreshadowing not just knowledge, but access. The treasure isn't power in the raw, it's governance over power. The greatest treasure is the right to decide whether this world-scale weapon system gets used to liberate the seas, raising the ancient kingdom's ship, flooding the Red Line, tearing down Mariejois, or gets bricked forever. And that means the prank at the end of the story isn't discovering a gun. It's watching Luffy sit at the control panel and choose whether the age of weapons even continues. Foreshadowing or retrofit. Classifying the weapon hints. So if the punchline is Luffy at a control panel, we need to talk about all the little wires Oda has been running under the floorboards for 25 years. Because the community keeps pointing at every glowing cable and yelling ancient weapon foreshadowing. And, listen to me, some of that is real, and some of that is you and me being pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast. Here's the thing. The weapon hints are not one monolithic category. You've got the Alabasta poneglyph naming Pluton. You've got Fishman Island spelling out Poseidon as the mermaid princess of this era. You've got Wano literally sitting on Pluton's parking garage. You've got Egghead dropping Mother Flame as a man-made world burner. And floating over all of that are those "the world will be overturned" / "the world will sink into the sea lines" from Whitebeard, Madame Charlie, and even Doflamingo ranting about the throne of the world. I need you to separate the scaffolding from the decorations. The existence of ancient weapons, the poneglyph network, the Void Century War. That's pre-writing. That's Oda deciding before Chapter 1. There was a super advanced kingdom, they had a weapon system, the government erased them, and the truth is carved into indestructible stone scattered across the globe. He doesn't discover that 400 chapters in. He's unveiling a blueprint he already filed. Then, inside that blueprint, you get actual foreshadowing. Joy Boy's apology and promise to Fishman Island. The Noah Ark hanging over the island, explicitly tied to a day of promised migration, and needing a Sea King user to tow it. Poseidon's power awakening in Shirahoshi and being framed as waiting for a future human from the surface to come down and use that power to change the world. Those aren't vague vibes. Those are specific setups for a known payoff. One day, when the conditions are right, someone will have the option to literally move species and reshape the seas. Compare that to Mother Flame on Egghead. Is it out of nowhere? No. It's a retrofit, a very smart one. Oda already had. Ancient energy source, mysterious sky laser that destroyed Lulusia, Vegapunk obsessed with replicating the past. Mother Flame is him taking that existing category, world-scale weapons tied to lost technology, and giving it a modern, controllable instance. Same with some of the hyper-specifics of Pluton being physically under Wano's sealed borders. The fact Pluton exists and is ship-shaped, pre-writing. It's literally under this country, and opening the borders is turning the key. That smells more like a later, elegant decision locked into an old framework. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal. This is fine. An author with a huge pre-written spine is still allowed to discover cool angles as they go, and when you zoom out, the category games almost stop mattering. Whether it's Joy Boy's promise, the Noah, Poseidon's timing, Pluton's location, or Mother Flame, the pattern is brutally consistent. Knowledge plus weapons plus timing equals a single, terrifying choice. The story has been steering toward one generation standing at that console. Next, we need to ask what it means that Roger walked into that room, read the manual, and walked back out. The world government's fear. Overreacting to treasure or rational about a weapon. Roger walks into the control room, reads the manual, and walks back out. Cool. Now zoom out and look at what the other side has been doing for 800 years to make sure no one else even gets near that room. Because here's the thing. The world government's behavior is the loudest, most unhinged piece of foreshadowing in the entire story, and the community keeps treating it as background noise. I need you to stop and actually catalogue what these people are willing to do. They didn't just censor a few books, they erased Ohara. Entire island, gone, because some nerds were too good at reading rocks. They hunt down anyone who can read poneglyphs, not people who own nukes. People who can do ancient linguistics. That's not a normal security policy. That's if Duolingo had the death penalty. They send CP9 after Nico Robin when she's 8. They put bounties on archaeologists. This is not a sin of overzealous policing. This is intentional systemic information control. Then stack on top of that their obsession with ancient weapons. Pluton in Wano, Poseidon in Fishman Island, Uranus in the background with Imu and the Mother Flame. Every time one of those names comes up, the government either tries to seize it, bury it, or annihilate the entire geography around it. The Buster Call on O'Hara. The near destruction of Fishman Island prophesied if Poseidon is misused. The terror around Pluton's blueprint in Water 7. They're not worried about treasure chests. They're worried about switches. Now, ask yourself, does this level of paranoia make any sense if the One Piece is just a mountain of gold or a punchline about friendship? The celestial dragons already sit on obscene wealth. They tax the world, own slaves, burn money for fun. They tolerate Yonko-level treasure hoards. Big Mom runs a confectionery empire. Kaido has factories. Buggy accidentally becomes an emperor. This is fine. This is normal. What they do not tolerate is someone combining forbidden knowledge with leverage. O'Hara had knowledge but no weapons. Erased. Poseidon is a weapon plus a prophecy. Surveilled and feared. Wano has Pluton under the country. Forcibly isolated for centuries. Laugh-Tale is the endpoint that ties all of that into a single operating system, and they are obsessed with making sure no one even knows it exists, much less reaches it. If the One Piece were just a prize, their behavior is cartoonishly irrational. If the One Piece is a control system that can dismantle their monopoly on violence and information in one move, suddenly their actions are horrifying, but rational. You don't let anyone near the off switch for your empire. So when the antagonists act as if the One Piece is a weapon they cannot afford anyone to use, that's not just villain flavor text. That's the author quietly labeling the MacGuffins category for you. And the real problem, the thing we need to dig into next, is why Roger, standing in front of that console with the full manual in hand, still chose not to push the button. Laugh-Tale as a launch site, geography, timing, and catastrophe. So if Roger stands in front of the console and refuses to push the button, we need to ask the obvious question. What actually happens when someone does? Not metaphorically, not in a "the world will change" Tumblr edit way. Physically, what fires off when you boot up Laugh-Tale? Start with the geography. Laugh-Tale sits at the end of the Grand Line, but that phrase is misleading. It's not a finish line. It's a convergence point. 4 road poneglyphs, 4 impossible islands, 4 magnetic routes that all slam together at a single set of coordinates you cannot brute force. That's not just cartography. That's lock design. When an author makes your map behave this weirdly, it's intentional. The location is part of the mechanism. Here's the thing. The Grand Line is a climate war crime. Reverse Mountain vomits oceans uphill. The calm belts are windless sea king zoos, and the Red Line just stabs through the planet as a continuous continent-sized wall. This is not a sin. This is not bad world building. This is Oda quietly screaming, "Something did this." The story keeps hinting that the current sea level, the calm belts, even the Red Line are consequences of a past event, not default settings. So when I say Laugh-Tale is a launch site, I don't mean a NASA pad with a Straw Hat branded rocket. I mean a control node. A place built directly on top of, or directly underneath, the ancient kingdom's remaining infrastructure. The road poneglyphs don't just guide you to a library of history. They guide you to the terminal that still talks to the hardware buried under the Red Line, under the calm belts, under the seas themselves. Pattern interrupt. What if Laugh-Tale isn't an island at all, but the one exposed piece of a machine the size of the planet? Think about the ancient weapons. Pluton is a ship that can erase islands. Poseidon commands sea kings, the literal teeth of the calm belts. Uranus is an undefined sky weapon that the world government treats as a panic button. The community keeps debating which weapon does what, but the foreshadowing points to a system, not 3 random nukes. 1 to control land, 1 to control sea life, 1 to control the sky. Together, That's a world editing toolkit. Now drop Laugh Tale at the nexus of all of that. The end of the Grand Line, directly interfacing with the Red Line's weirdness, positioned where 4 magnetic fields and 4 stone GPS keys agree for the first and only time. Using the One Piece might mean authorizing that system to run again, not fire a beam again, recalculate the entire map, destroy the Red Line, and suddenly the all-blue exists. Shift sea levels and every paradise and new world border disappears. Cancel the calm belts and the age of isolated kingdoms is over by Tuesday. And this is where the revolutionary endgame stops being metaphor. A weapon that redraws continents is a weapon that can literally dismantle the world government's geography-based monopoly. That's not treasure. That's regime change baked into the tectonic plates. Which raises the next problem. If pushing that button means drowning millions to free billions, who is allowed to decide that? Because Roger saw the blueprint and walked away. Luffy is going to see the blueprint and still have to choose. Red Line, Fishman Island, and the promise of a new world. So when we talk about that blueprint, we need to stop treating the Red Line as just fantasy geography and start treating it as a crime scene. Because listen to me, Fishman Island is not just a quirky underwater detour. It is a visual diagram of the problem Joy Boy was trying to solve and failed. Fishman Island sits under the Red Line, directly beneath Mary Joy's, propped up by a bubble and a promise. Literally, the promise from Joy Boy to move them to the surface one day, to give them a home in the sun, is carved into history as this ancient apology letter. He planned something, he built something, and then, for reasons we still don't fully know, he couldn't finish the job. So you get this entire race stuck under the feet of the celestial dragons, physically and politically, waiting for a promise that's older than the world government itself. Here's the thing. The story keeps screaming that this setup is unnatural. The Red Line shouldn't be this impenetrable wall. The Grand Line and calm belts forming 4 segregated oceans is too neat, too convenient for an accident of nature. Every time Vegapunk or Clover or anyone with more than 2 brain cells talks about the ancient past, the subtext is that someone engineered the current map. Someone used technology on the scale of Pluton or Uranus to redraw the planet into 4 pens, then sorted people into them and called that order. That's not just geography. That's infrastructure for inequality. It's a planned category system where fishmen go down, celestial dragons go up, and everyone else gets stuck in the middle lanes murdering each other for scraps. When fans say New World, they usually mean the second half of the Grand Line. But in story, characters keep slipping and talking about a new world as in a new order, a new age, a new way people relate to each other. That's intentional. The author is using the same phrase for a sea and for a social reboot. So if the One Piece is the key to a world reset weapon, suddenly all of this clicks. Destroy or punch a hole through the Red Line, and 3 things happen at once. Fishman Island can finally move to the surface, the 4 seas unify into one ocean, and the world government's entire barrier-based power structure evaporates. 1 tectonic move, 3 systemic collapses. That's not treasure. That's a jailbreak for the whole planet. And I need you to see how carefully this has been foreshadowed. Shirahoshi is Poseidon, an ancient weapon whose whole deal is commanding sea kings large enough to tow islands. Noah is a literal migration ark parked over Fishman Island, waiting for a signal. Joy Boy's apology, Neptune's prophecy, Madame Shiali's vision of Luffy destroying Fishman Island. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is pre-writing. The author decided ages ago that the same trigger that fulfills Joy Boy's promise would also physically reshape the map. Which raises the next terrifying question. When Luffy activates that system, does he become the guy who saves everyone, or the guy who drowns the old world to build the new one? Because the series has been quietly training you to accept that trade long before you ever saw a poneglyph. Why a joke treasure ending would betray the story. And here's where the "it was all just a gag" crowd crashes headfirst into a wall. If the thing Luffy triggers can literally drown the old world to build a new one, then no, The payoff cannot be surprise. The real treasure was the journey. I need you to really sit with that, because the popular joke ending theory is basically three options wearing different wigs. The One Piece is a sake party, the One Piece is a note saying, good job, keep dreaming, or the One Piece is nothing, and the laugh is that everyone cared so much. On paper, this is fun. It matches the meme version of Oda in the community. The gremlin author who would end a 30-year epic on a dad joke. It also reassures fans who are terrified of a Naruto-style alien goddess escalation. Don't worry, it'll just be a goofy party, no stakes, no space lasers. This is fine as a coping mechanism. This is normal. But as an actual prediction of the writing? It completely misreads how Oda balances tone and consequence. Because here's the thing, Oda does not use comedy to erase stakes. He uses comedy to make the stakes hurt more. Skypiea is full of nonsense faces and ball gags, and then you remember it's about a genocide, a stolen homeland, and a god who literally executes people for fun. Dressrosa has toy soldier slapstick right next to child slavery. The joke is the sugarcoating. It is not the medicine. So when fans say, what if the void century mystery, the ancient weapons, the global oppression, all culminate in a punchline? I need you to hear how that sounds next to Ohara burning, next to a little girl listening to scholars die so the truth can survive, next to Fisher Tiger bleeding out because he refused to sign on to either human supremacy or Fishman revenge. Decades of foreshadowing about erased history and inherited will do not belong in the same category as a Scooby-Doo unmasking gag. And Oda has literally told you this. He has said, on record, that the One Piece is a real, tangible thing. Not the friends we made along the way. Not a metaphor. Not a vibes-based treasure. The laziest version of the joke theory is already dead by author fiat. When the guy who planned Laboon and Brook 50 years apart tells you, no, there is an actual reward, you believe him. Will there be humour at Laugh Tale? Absolutely. Roger laughed. The crew laughed. It's called Laugh Tale. Of course there's a joke component, but the core cannot be a punchline, because the entire world government is terrified of this thing. You do not erase an island, build a celestial nuke squad, and hunt scholars for a party invitation. So we need to ask a harder question. What kind of real, tangible thing can make pirates laugh, make governments panic, and still justify an ocean-wide reset? And why was Roger, with all his power, still too early to use it? Pattern-seeking pirates. How fandom overcredits 4D chess. And here's where we have to talk about the pattern-seeking monkey in the room. You, me. Every One Piece fan who has ever zoomed in on a blurry panel and drawn a red circle on Twitter. We are wired to connect dots. We are evolved to see snakes in tall grass and faces in clouds and Jesus in toast. So when Oda drops a line about a weapon that can shake the world and a mysterious treasure that can turn the world upside down, our brains go, oh, obviously, same thing, 4D chess, 20-year foreshadowing. Listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. The problem is when the community quietly slides from this could be connected into Oda definitely planned this Egghead reveal in East Blue, and anyone who disagrees just doesn't get his genius. You've seen the posts. A random circular shadow in the background of a Skypiea panel. Proof that's Uranus over the Holy Land. A decorative gear motif in Water 7 architecture. Secret hint that the One Piece is an ancient engine weapon. Someone finds a single line about the sea itself rebelling, and suddenly it's confirmation that Laugh Tale houses a world reset device. At a certain point, we're not analysing foreshadowing, we're doing conspiracy corkboard cosplay. Here's the thing. Once you decide the One Piece is a weapon, your brain starts speed-running the manga to back you up. That's confirmation bias in one sentence. You form a belief first, then you selectively collect panels, quotes, and SBS answers that support it, while quietly ignoring everything that doesn't fit. Pareidolia is the visual cousin to that. Seeing patterns that aren't intentional, treating every swirl of cloud and background statue as a deliberate ancient weapon glyph because you're already sold on the theory. I need you to notice how different that is from actual, intentional foreshadowing. Laboon and Brooks' promise? That's planned. Nika imagery seeded across Skypiea, Fishman Island, and Dressrosa. That's pre-writing. But when someone circles a random Egghead monitor screen and calls it proof, Oda always meant the One Piece to be a planet buster. That's not uncovering authorial intent. That's reading tea leaves. And weirdly, this over-crediting kind of disrespects Oda's real craft, because what's actually impressive is not mythical omniscience, where he storyboarded every panel in 1997. It's the adaptive genius where he can retrofit an old gag into Kinemon's trauma, or take a vague Sky Island mantra and solidify it into a whole Haki system. When you insist every connection was planned from Chapter 1, you flatten the writing process into a magic trick instead of a long, messy, brilliant act of storytelling problem-solving. So we need to hold two truths at once. Yes, there are genuine, terrifying long-term setups around ancient weapons and the Void Century. And yes, some of the evidence for the One Piece weapon theory is just us being pattern-seeking monkeys with Wi-Fi. The fun part is sorting which is which, sorting. And to do that, we have to zoom in on the stuff we can actually prove Oda planned. Why it matters, mislabeling clues, warps, how we read One Piece. So here's where this stops being a fun Reddit hobby and starts actively warping how you read One Piece. When you convince yourself Oda pre-planned every atom of every panel, you're not just complimenting the author, you're building a trap. If you believe the story is a perfectly solved equation from Chapter 1, then any future deviation from your head math stops being, oh, the plan evolved, and becomes bad writing. This is how you get people calling Wano a failure, because it didn't match a 2013 power scaling spreadsheet. Listen to me. Even with insane pre-writing, Oda is still a human being who has been drawing the same pirate for 25 years. Of course, priorities shift. Of course, themes sharpen. Of course, some setups are just cool debris he later sweeps into a new pattern. This is normal. Demanding total pre-planning means the ending can only ever confirm you, never surprise you, and that is a miserable way to experience storytelling. Now take that mindset and pour it onto the weapon theory. If every neat connection must be intentional proof that the One Piece is a world reset system, you start flattening everything into engineering diagrams. Suddenly, Skypiea isn't about faith versus greed, it's early sky laser foreshadowing. Fishman Island stops being about racism and inherited trauma. It's Poseidon firmware update. You're so busy reverse engineering the mechanism that you miss the point that the emotional payload is Luffy's choice about what to do with that mechanism. Here's the thing. If the One Piece is a weapon system, the drama isn't can it blow up the red line? The drama is, does Luffy push the button, rewire it, or walk away? The thematic nuance is in the decision, not the hardware. And when we mislabel obvious retrofits as ironclad foreshadowing, we set ourselves up to feel cheated. If you've spent 10 years treating some panel of Roger staring at the sea as confirmed evidence of Uranus coordinates, and then Oda casually explains in an SBS that it was just him being nostalgic, you don't go, oh, neat clarification. You feel robbed. The story didn't betray you. Your category error did. You promoted a fun headcanon to canon in your heart and then got mad when reality didn't follow your fan on patch notes. This is not a sin on your part. This is fine. We're all pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and Pluton in every boat. But we need to remember, even if the One Piece is a weapon system, that doesn't mean every panel is secretly about that system. Oda is also telling intimate, self-contained character stories that work even if you never learn what Uranus actually is. Chopper's medical dream, Robin's found family, Sanji's self-worth crisis, those aren't tutorials for an endgame super machine. They're the moral context for whoever ends up holding the keys. So, I need you to adopt a healthier reading mode. Treat theories as toys, not commandments. Use them to stay engaged, to notice patterns, to hype yourself up, but leave some oxygen for Oda to do something you didn't predict within the broad shape we've outlined. Because the real magic trick isn't that the One Piece might be a weapon. It's what happens when a freedom-obsessed rubber idiot finally stands in front of the trigger. And to see why that trigger exists at all, we have to talk about what Roger actually found on Laugh-Tale, and what he couldn't do with it. Reframing Oda's genius, flexibility over omniscience. So when I say Roger stood in front of a trigger he couldn't pull, I'm not saying Oda had a 40-page engineering diagram of that trigger taped above his desk in 1997. I'm saying he had the blueprint room. He built the category of world-scale mechanism into the story so early and so hard that whatever the One Piece turns out to be, it can plug into that system without snapping anything. Here's the thing. Oda's real genius isn't omniscience, it's scaffolding. Before Chapter 1, he locks in these huge load-bearing pillars, the Void Century, an ancient kingdom with impossible technology, the Poneglyph network, and a trio of ancient weapons that can literally rewrite the map. That's not a cute Easter egg. That's structural engineering. Those concepts are broad enough that he can hang 10 different future payoffs on them, but specific enough that they still feel intentional when they finally fire. Then, decades in, he drops something like the Mother Flame, or Elbaf's specific history, or Egghead's Island of the Future tech. And it all just clicks. Fans go, wow, Oda planned this from day one. No. He pre-wrote the skeleton, then retrofitted the organs as he went. The Mother Flame is a perfect example. A new term, a new device. But it slots into the pre-existing ancient weapon ecosystem so cleanly that your pattern-seeking monkey brain starts seeing Jesus in the toast of every old panel with a weird light beam. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-form storytelling has to work if the author doesn't want to be handcuffed by a 1,000-chapter spreadsheet they wrote in their 20s. The problem is that our community keeps collapsing everything into one mythical category. He planned it all. If it rhymes, it was foreshadowing. If it fits, it was intentional from day one. And if you suggest retrofitting, half the comments treat that as accusing Oda of fraud. Listen to me. Retrofitting inside robust pre-writing is the flex. That's the part you actually can't fake. Anyone can scribble, "There was a great kingdom in the margins," holding that line for 25 years while still giving yourself room to invent Mother Flame, to deepen Fishman Island's prophecy, to turn Poseidon from weapon into terrified child with god powers. That's craft. So when we say the One Piece can be a world reset weapon, Oda didn't need the exact UI for the Doomsday button in Chapter 1. He needed a historical and technological framework where a weapon, a key, a power grid for the sea level, even a Joy Boy activated climate bomb could all live in the same slot without contradiction. That's what the Poneglyphs do. That's what Laugh-Tale is. The place where every flexible setup converges into one hard choice. And if we actually respect that, we stop flattening Oda into perfect profit and start appreciating him as a writer constantly solving new problems inside an old design. Which raises a much uglier question. What problem was he designing this weapon to solve in the first place? So, what is the One Piece, exactly? A coherent theory. So here's where I need you to stop thinking in treasure chest brain and start thinking in control panel brain. The problem Oda is solving is not, how do I hide some gold for 1,000 chapters? The problem is, how do I stash a world-scale button in a shonen adventure and have you cheer when someone presses it? So here's the theory, stated as plainly as I can. The One Piece is a physical, tangible mechanism on Laugh-Tale. Not a metaphor, not a vibe, not a punchline. It's the master control for the ancient kingdom's global system. The thing that coordinates the ancient weapons, the thing the Poneglyph network is pointing at, the thing Joy Boy built the rest of his plan around. Functionally, it's an interface. You don't swing it. You don't wear it. You stand in front of it and decide. When the right conditions are met, Pluton in position under Wano, Poseidon awakened in Fishman Island, Uranus or whatever atmospheric horror Emu has parked in the sky accounted for, borders opened, nations ready, it lets you hit execute on a planetary script. Geography, currents, even who controls the high ground of the world, all get rewritten in one intentional act. And all the foreshadowing is screaming the same outcome. Fishman Island's prophecy about the Straw Hats destroying it. The promise that Noah's Ark will finally be used correctly. The constant obsession with the red line and the divided seas. Put that in one category. This is a story building toward the destruction of the red line and the unification of the oceans. The One Piece is the console that makes that not just thematically satisfying, but mechanically possible. Here's the thing. That also means we need to be really clear about what it is not. It's not just a pile of gold, no matter how many times the community ironically posts the old One Piece of Treasure meme. It's not just a joke, even if there's a joke on top of it. It's not simply information, because information alone doesn't sink continents. The history, the poneglyphs, the ancient weapons, those are the documentation and the infrastructure. The One Piece is the button that turns all that into a single, irreversible choice. Which is exactly why Roger walked away. He reached the interface. He saw the whole system. But Poseidon wasn't born yet. Wano wasn't open. The world wasn't ready to survive the reset. So instead of half-pressing the apocalypse switch, he laughed, named the island, and started a global scavenger hunt, so some future idiot sun god with better timing could inherit the moral burden. And listen to me, because this is the non-negotiable part. Any satisfying ending has to hit those beats. There has to be a world reset mechanism, not just a speech. There has to be a genuine moral choice, not just press X to freedom. And there has to be a payoff to Joy Boy's promises that uses the weapon without turning Luffy into a tyrant. Which raises a nastier problem we need to talk about next. What does it mean when the freest man on the sea becomes the only person allowed to reformat the planet? What happens if Luffy pulls the trigger? Because here's the thing, once you admit the One Piece is a trigger, not a treasure chest, you have to ask the ugliest question in the room. What happens if Luffy actually pulls it? Not metaphorically. I mean the literal world reset, red line shattering, geography patch notes, 3.0 button. So run the tape. 1 second, the red line is this smug stone spine splitting the seas and giving Mariéjois its built-in "we're above you" foreshadowing. Next second, cracked, shattered. The Grand Line stops being a maze and turns into a freeway. The calm belts lose their moat function. Fishman Island, that buried compromise under the nobles' feet, gets yeeted to the surface where it always should have been. The world government's entire planned geographic advantage, 4 seas, 1 holy elevator, 1 sacred middle seat, disappears overnight. That's not a symbolic change. That's a logistics war crime. Trade routes flip. Weather patterns go feral. Islands that used to be end-of-the-world destinations suddenly have cruise traffic. I need you to imagine the 1,000 sunnies sailing over the ruins of what used to be Mariéjois, while the tides literally redraw the map in real time. Politically, it's a guillotine with extra steps. The celestial dragons don't just lose altitude, they lose the whole visual metaphor their power was built on. No red line, no, we live in heaven, you live in the mud category. The Marines. They're suddenly a coast guard in a world with no coast that makes sense. Their bases were intentionally placed around the current map. Now those placements are bad writing from a strategy textbook. Yonko territories dissolve, New World choke points vanish, and every pirate crew that built its empire on hard-to-reach real estate has to improvise or die. And here's the moral problem. Even if this is a liberating reset, it's still mass-scale destruction. Islands will sink. People will drown. Whole cultures get displaced. This is not a sin in terms of storytelling. This is normal when you push a literal continental weapon. But it does mean Luffy, the guy who punches celestial dragons for hurting a friend, has to live with the fact that his freedom move killed people who never chose any of this. Does he do it anyway? We know his instinct. If Fishman Island is doomed unless the world changes, he presses the button without reading the terms of service. Dressrosa Luffy absolutely does it. Post-Wano Luffy has at least heard the word consequences in a sentence not followed by meat shortage. He's grown from save my friend to topple a country to ignite a global incident and still sleep on the sunny. So the real climax isn't just yes or no on the trigger. It's the frame. Does he say, I'm Joy Boy, I'm here to complete the plan? Or does he say, I heard your will, but I'm writing my own ending? Because if the author has been intentionally setting up a weapon only one idiot sun god rubber boy can fire, the last twist might be that he uses it in a way even Joy Boy didn't foresee. And that takes us to the final uncomfortable step. What if the real danger isn't the weapon at all, but who the world decides gets to aim it next? And what if he doesn't? The nuclear option of refusal. So here's the nightmare scenario I need you to sit with. What if Luffy gets to Laugh Tale, learns the too early secret Roger couldn't act on, and then just says no? Not because he's stupid, not because he doesn't understand, because he understands it too well. Picture it. Final saga, all poneglyphs assembled, Vegapunk's data dump processed, the true history unredacted. Luffy walks into the ancient kingdom's control room, or whatever terrifying cathedral of science they built, and the One Piece isn't a chest. It's a switch. It's the last key in a system that ties Uranus in the sky, Pluton under Wano, Poseidon in the sea, all into one world-scale reset button. Press it, and you can sync Redline, merge the seas, erase the world government's borders in a single biblical patch update. On paper, that's the inherited will. That's Joy Boy's finish what I started. Roger was too early because the world wasn't ready. The pieces weren't on the board. Luffy is exactly on time. The author has been intentionally foreshadowing this category of choice from Skypiea's endless verse fantasies to Fishman Island's prophecy of Noah moving when Joy Boy returns. This is the planned payoff. Except here's the thing. Luffy's dream has never been fix the world with a god laser. His dream is be the freest person on the sea. This is where we need to stop being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast every time someone says, change the world. There's a difference between, I want to topple tyrants, and I want the power to rewrite the map in one move. So imagine he refuses. He looks at Dragon, who has spent decades building armies and ideology. He looks at Sabo, who's literally in the trenches burning flags. He remembers Vivi in Alabasta, trying to reform a kingdom from the inside without a magic nuke. And he decides that pulling the ancient kingdom's lever would repeat the void century problem. One group forcing their ideal world onto everyone else, even if their ideal is objectively better than a celestial dragon in a goldfish bowl. Refusing to fire doesn't mean doing nothing. It means disarming it or twisting it. Maybe he uses the system once, in a constrained way, opening a path to the surface for fishmen, but not erasing every island in the process. Maybe he scatters the components so no future chosen one can cosplay God. That's still engaging the weapon. It's just using the power to remove itself from the board. That is the most Luffy thing imaginable. Handed the ultimate control panel and punching it to pieces. And narratively, this solves a massive problem. If the author gives him a fake treasure with no teeth, the story dodges responsibility for 25 years of foreshadowing about weapons that can destroy the world. If the One Piece is a real, functional, horrifying mechanism, then Luffy has to make a real, horrifying choice. Use it and own the consequences, or refuse it and accept a slower, messier era of revolutions, coups, and compromises. Either way, the One Piece is still a weapon. The twist is that our idiot sun god chooses to point it at the very idea that anyone should ever hold that power again. Which raises the final uncomfortable question. What if the world refuses to let him walk away from the trigger? Revisiting the journey. How every major arc points to this choice. So to answer that, we need to rewind, not to the lore, but to the pattern. Because Oda hasn't just been foreshadowing a big cannon at the end of the world, He's been running Luffy through a moral obstacle course to see what he does when you hand him smaller versions of that cannon. Start with Alabasta. Crocodile is literally using an ancient weapon rumor, Pluton, as a pretext to hijack a kingdom. That's the test case. Weapon discourse plus regime change. Luffy beats him, sure. But what does he not do? He doesn't sit on Cobra's throne, doesn't dictate a new government, doesn't even stick around for the photo op. He punches the warlord, eats the meat, and leaves the people to figure out their own system. Power toppled. Zero interest in ruling. Enies lobby is the same category, different angle. Here's the thing. The Straw Hats declare war on the world government in the most theatrical way possible. Burn the flag, save their friend, punch a cipher pole assassin through a tower. But when Spandam is crawling on the ground, when the symbol of that regime is right there, Luffy doesn't give a speech about becoming the new justice. He just wants Robin free. Freedom for individuals over control of institutions. Every time. Marineford is the negative example. This is what happens when the people in charge of a world-scale weapon system actually use it. Bust a call. Pacifistas. An execution broadcast as propaganda. And Luffy. He's a complete disaster tactically, but morally it's crystal clear. He's not there to seize the board. He's there to save one person and then run. The story is screaming, this is not your future Pirate King's fantasy scenario. Dressrosa hands him a literal country built on toys, slavery, and mind control. Doflamingo is a tyrant with threads in every institution. Luffy wrecks him, the birdcage falls, and then he walks away. Refuses to be a hero, doesn't stay to oversee the transition, leaves Riku and the citizens to decide what after looks like. The author keeps showing you the same decision from different angles. Whole cake is a pattern interrupt. No regime change, just a Yonko's domestic nightmare. But again, he turns down thrones. He won't become the boss of Germa. Won't weaponize Sanji's trauma army. Won't take Big Mom's political leverage even when it would be strategically brilliant. I need you to clock how consistently he refuses consolidated power. Then Wano. Samurai. Closed borders. Pluton sleeping under the country. This is the closest prequel to Laugh Tale. Luffy defeats Kaido, could absolutely dictate Wano's future, and instead tells Momonosuke and Yamato to choose. He doesn't unseal Pluton. He literally sails away from a world-ending weapon. Listen to me. That's not random characterization. That's intentional calibration. These arcs are moral training grounds, teaching you what kind of idiot you'd actually trust with a world reset button. So when we finally hit Laugh Tale, it won't just be a lore dump about Joy Boy. It'll be the moment you realize Oda has been showing you Luffy's answer in miniature for 20 years, and the only real question left is whether the world will let him stick to it. Stop saying Oda planned everything, a better way to praise him. And this is where I need you to uninstall one particular fandom brainworm because it ruins everything I just said. It's the meme, the shrine, the sacred copypasta. Oda planned everything from chapter 1. You've seen the side-by-side panels on Twitter, early Laboon, late Brook, early Skypiea Sun motif, Gear 5, early treasure jokes, my unhinged weapon theory. And the conclusion is always the same. He's a 5D chess god who wrote the entire manga in one sitting on a napkin in 1997. Here's the thing. That compliment is both wrong and boring. Wrong. Because we have interviews where Oda openly admits to changing ideas, cutting characters, adjusting arcs for health, for popularity, for editors. Boring, because it treats storytelling as a magic trick instead of a craft. If the only category you have is he planned it from chapter 1, you erase the actual difficulty, sustaining a 25-plus year story under shifting schedules, trends, and personal burnout without it collapsing into nonsense. We need better vocabulary. So instead of worshipping perfect planning, talk about his robust scaffolding. The man clearly pre-wrote the endgame. Void Century, Ancient Weapons, Joy Boy, Laugh Tale, the world reset mechanism I'm arguing the One Piece actually is. That's the steel frame of the building. But within that frame, he's doing modular world building. He can slot in Skypea's Sky Island theology, Zoo's Mink prophecy, Wano's Pluton bunker, Egghead's Vegapunk info dump, and have them all snap onto the same underlying weapon system without snapping the story in half. And when the early material doesn't quite match, that's not "he planned it from chapter 1. That's elegant retrofits. Skypea's mantra becoming haki. Fishman Island's prophecy being quietly tightened to match Luffy's role. Ancient weapons slowly converging from 3 disconnected doomsday MacGuffins into one coordinated planetary infrastructure. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how an author survives serialization without turning into a continuity cryptid. So instead of asking, did he plan this? Start asking, how did Oda make this feel planned? That one verb shift forces you to notice technique, panel echoes, symbol reuse. The way a single poneglyph on Skypiea casually points toward both Poseidon and Laughtail, so that when you reread after Fishman Island and Zoo, your pattern-seeking monkey brain sees Jesus in the stone tablet and goes, he knew. Take the weapon theory we've been building. The reason it feels intentional isn't because Oda sat there in 97 plotting Egghead's exact dialogue. It's because he pre-wrote, One Piece is tied to an ancient world reset system Roger couldn't trigger. Then he spent decades reinforcing that with modular arcs. Alabasta teaching Pluton can erase nations, Fishman Island reframing Shirahoshi as Poseidon, Wano literally parking Pluton under a closed border, Egghead confirming the ancient kingdom's tech could sink the seas. Early pre-writing made the category possible. Later arcs retrofitted details into that category, while still leaving room for surprise about what the final button actually does. And once you start seeing that, you can't unsee it in other series. You stop screaming plot hole every time an author adjusts a detail. You stop canonizing he planned everything as the only form of good writing. You become a more thoughtful, less dogmatic reader who can tell the difference between a cheap coincidence and a genuinely robust scaffolding. Hold on to that, because next I want to stress test this weapon framework against the scariest counter-argument. What if the One Piece really is just treasure, and we're all overfitting patterns onto a joke Roger made on the beach? Bringing it home. The One Piece in 3 sentences. So let's bring this home, because we've been in the weeds for a while and I need you to leave with a clean save file in your brain. We built this whole argument on 3 categories: foreshadowing, retrofitting, and pre-writing. Oda is not a wizard randomly guessing future plot points. He's an author running all 3 tools at once, with pre-written endgame scaffolding, intentional foreshadowing on top of that, and the occasional smart retrofit when the serialization gods throw him a curveball. Here's the thing. Once you separate those categories, the One Piece itself stops being this fuzzy meme treasure and snaps into focus in 3 sentences. 1. The One Piece is a real, physical, world-scale mechanism at Laughtail, a kind of final ancient weapon node that can reset the political and even literal shape of the planet. 2. Roger absolutely found it, plus the true history, but he was structurally too early to use it. No Poseidon awakened, no Pluton freed from Wano, no inherited will network primed. So all he could do was laugh, walk away, and kick off a pirate era to grow the future user. 3. Luffy is going to inherit not just a pile of treasure, but a loaded choice. The power to pull the trigger on that mechanism, or refuse and find another way to free the world. Does that sound dramatic? Sure. But this is the reading that actually fits the evidence, instead of turning us into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast every time a D smiles. The Void Century isn't a quirky lore nugget. It's a full-scale war where an ancient kingdom with terrifying technology challenged the ancestors of the world government using weapons on the level of Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. Every time the story talks about national fates, Alabasta's survival hinging on Pluton, Fishman Island's future tied to the Sea Kings, Wano literally sitting on a doomsday battleship, it's reinforcing that the core conflict is about who controls world-ending infrastructure. Joy Boy's broken promises to Fishman Island, the Noah, the poneglyph trail from Skypea's bell to Zoo's roadstone to Wano's closed borders, the world government's absolute terror of anyone reading that script. None of that points to a prank chest of gold. It points to a system. It points to a final piece. Now, will the details wobble as the manga sprints to the finish? Of course. This is normal. Oda can still tweak the exact form of the mechanism, the rituals, the conditions, and I fully expect some retrofitting on the margins because this is not a sin. This is just long-form writing in the real world. But at this stage, some version of weaponized mechanism plus moral choice at the end of the world is almost impossible to dodge without breaking his own foreshadowing trail from Loguetown executions to Egghead data dumps. So here's the simple model I need you to walk away with. The One Piece isn't gold. It's a loaded option, a Chekhov's superweapon wired into the bones of the planet, and the story of One Piece is not who finds it, but who finally decides whether to pull the trigger or set the gun down and walk away. How to watch One Piece. Differently after this. So if the One Piece is a loaded option and not a treasure chest, the question becomes, how do you actually watch this story now? How do you read a gun on the mantle when you know the author already wrote the shooting scene? Here's the thing. I need you to stop watching One Piece as a hype compilation and start watching it as a lab report. On your next rewatch, don't just chase cool fights. Track who gets power, who refuses power, and who gets crushed by responsibility. Alabasta isn't just Save Vivi's Kingdom. It's an early case study in a weaponized state. Eni's Lobby isn't just Robin crying. It's the judiciary branch of a world that once killed an entire century of history to keep a system online. When a nation shows up, ask one annoying question. How does this plug into the Void Century's operating system? Skypea's Sky Island and its ancient ruin, Zoo's walking elephant, Wano's closed borders, Egghead's techno-utopia with a death sentence attached. Each country is either a fragment of the old world, a firewall built by the world government, or a leftover piece of Joy Boy's infrastructure. Put them in a mental map. Where are the terminals? Where are the launch keys? And as you do this, I want you to start tagging moments in your head. Foreshadowing, retrofitting, or pre-writing. Vegapunk talking about a man-made sun? Is that intentional setup for Uranus? A retrofit to justify Gear 5 imagery, or a shard of an outline Oda wrote in the 90s finally surfacing? This is not a sin, by the way. Mislabeling categories is normal. We are all pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast and Joy Boy in every silhouette. This is fine. The point is to train your intuition for Oda's methods instead of just screaming peek when a double spread drops. When an ancient weapon is mentioned, pause. How is it framed? As a nuke, as a promise, as a responsibility. Poseidon isn't a button. She's a person who can flood the world. Pluton in Wano isn't a ship. It's a national suicide switch. Ask whether that framing reinforces the weapon theory or quietly undercuts it. And now, heading into Egghead and whatever fresh war crime Oda has planned after, treat new chapters as data points, not emotional verdicts. Vegapunk dumps a new Void Century line? Cool. Does it support the idea of a world reset system, or does it suggest the One Piece is something else entirely? You're not trying to win the theory war. You're stress testing a model. You can hold multiple possibilities in your head at once. This is normal. Scientists do it. Authors do it. Fans can do it too. Because listen to me. This channel is not carving a prophecy into stone. We need to keep updating the framework every time Oda drops another puzzle piece. This video should become a living reference, not a frozen prediction you quote on Reddit in 2030. And if that sounds abstract, good. Because in the next section, I'm going to show you exactly how one specific arc looks completely different once you put the gun back on the mantle and assume it's already loaded. Your turn. Argue with me, responsibly, about the One Piece. So now it's your turn to pick up the gun I just put back on the mantle and argue about whether it even is a gun. I need you to. That's the whole point of building this framework instead of just screaming weapon for 2 hours and logging off. If you still think the One Piece is just treasure, or a big joke, or a symbolic freedom prize with no concrete mechanism attached, I want your best case in the comments. Not vibes, not Oda would never. I want you to walk through it in the same categories we used. What's actual foreshadowing? What's retrofitting? What's pre-writing? When you say it's just gold, where's the intentional setup? What panels? What lines? What repeated images are pointing there on purpose, instead of us being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast every time a chest shows up? And if you're on board with the weapon theory, you are not off the hook. It's a weapon is not a complete thought. Here's the thing. We need to get specific. Is it a trigger that uses Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus as components? Is it a world flood button tied to the red line collapsing? Is it a Joy Boy operating system that only boots once the ancient weapons are in place? How do you see that mechanism working in the story without turning Luffy into some genocidal warlord who suddenly loves pressing extinction switches? Spell out the scene. Tell me where he is, who's there, what he says when he realizes he can literally erase the current world order. How does an author who has spent 25 years making this idiot's core dream freedom for everyone write him standing in front of a world reset system and still keep that consistent? This is not a sin, by the way, to admit it's hard. This is normal. That's why I want your versions. Also, do me a favor. You know that one friend in your group chat who still posts, "The real One Piece was the friends we made along the way," every time Oda's name trends? Send them this video, not as a dunk, as an intervention. Sit them down, pat them on the head and say, "Listen to me. Our beloved clown author has spent decades constructing a planetary doomsday Rube Goldberg machine, and you're over here quoting Tumblr 2013. You're doing this out of love, and a little malice, but mostly love. This isn't a one-off rant, by the way. This is step one in a bigger project. I'm going to do full deep dives on each piece of the system. A Pluton video, a Poseidon video, a Uranus video, and a redline video, where we really ask why the map is built around a giant stone wall begging to be deleted. If you want those, you know what to do. And if you made it all the way through 2 hours of me insisting the One Piece is a weapon Roger couldn't use, congratulations. You are exactly the kind of sicko this channel is for. Hit subscribe, drop your theory, and I'll see you at the next war crime of foreshadowing.